The glass-enclosed private dining room at Atlanta's most exclusive steakhouse smelled of expensive cologne roasted prime rib and desperate ambition. I arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, wearing a bespoke charcoal blazer that cost more than my sister's entire heavily branded outfit, but carried absolutely no visible logos. As managing director of mergers and acquisitions for a ruthless New York private equity firm, I had long ago learned that loud money talks while true wealth whispers. My family, however, preferred to scream. Vanessa sat at the head of the long mahogany table holding court. At 35, she was the golden child of our family, running a boutique real estate brokerage, heavily subsidized by our parents. Beside her sat her husband Bradley, a 38-year-old commercial real estate developer whose aggressive spray tan and forced southern drawl never quite masked his inherent condescension. How was White deeply privileged and completely unaware of how remarkably average his business acumen actually was. My parents, Thomas and Patricia, flanked them like royal guards. My father, the charismatic pastor of one of the city's largest megachurches, adjusted his custom silk tie, while my mother, the fierce charity chairwoman, draped her mink shawl over her chair. They were the picture of black elite perfection, an image they guarded with religious fervor. I was the stain on that image. The daughter who packed a single bag at 18 and bought a one-way bus ticket to New York instead of attending their hand-picked conservative Bible college. I stepped into the room and the lively chatter instantly died. 12 pairs of eyes belonging to extended aunts, uncles, and Bradley's core investors locked onto me. "Rachel, you are late," Patricia said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of Southern church lady sweetness that actually meant pure venom. I checked my bare wrist, glancing at the vintage luxury watch hidden under my cuff. "I am exactly on time, Mother." The traffic out of the airport was heavy. I reached for the only empty leather chair near the center of the table. Before my fingers could even graze the wood, Patricia raised a manicured hand. "Rachel, this table is for family and the core investors of Bradley's new high-rise project. We need to discuss sensitive commercial details tonight." She gestured vaguely toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the crowded, noisy outdoor patio, where the summer humidity was already stifling. "Go find a spot outside. We will have a waiter bring you a menu out there so you do not distract the men from their business." The room went dead silent. My uncle shifted uncomfortably in his seat but looked down at his water glass. No one ever challenged Patricia or Thomas. It was the unwritten rule of our family. You either worshipped at their altar, or you were cast into the outer darkness. Vanessa covered her mouth to hide a smirk, pretending to cough gently into her napkin. I did not argue. I did not storm out in a tearful rage like I might have done a decade ago. I simply pulled the heavy leather chair out and sat down right across from Bradley. I placed my handbag smoothly onto the table right next to his water glass. "I think I will stay right here," I said, my voice soft, but carrying absolute authority. "The patio is a bit too loud for my taste, and I have a feeling the conversation in here is about to get very interesting." Bradley leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and letting out a patronizing chuckle. He looked at me with that familiar condescending gaze he reserved exclusively for me and his minority subordinates. "Rachel, sweetie," he drawled, stretching out the syllables until they dripped with condescension. "You do not really understand how high society networking operates, do you? This is a $50 million closing dinner. We are talking capitalization rates, zoning permits, and massive liquid asset transfers. It is high-level finance, not exactly the kind of thing you would grasp working whatever little desk job you have up in New York. Maybe you would be more comfortable outside where you do not have to pretend to keep up with the adults." I looked at Bradley, taking in his flashy watch and the slight sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. "I manage billion-dollar corporate restructurings for breakfast, parsing through complex international tax laws before he even wakes up, but I decided to let him have his moment." "High-level finance," I repeated slowly, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "How fascinating, Bradley. Please do not let my lack of understanding stop you from celebrating your massive liquid asset transfers. I am eager to learn." Vanessa chimed in, her voice loud and grating. "Do not mind her, Bradley. Rachel always has to ruin a good mood because she is bitter. She has been jealous of my success since we were teenagers. Just ignore her presence and let us order our food." The waiter arrived, breaking the heavy tension. My family immediately resumed their performance, ordering the most expensive items on the menu. They were putting on a show for Bradley's investors, proving they belonged to the upper echelon of society. I sat quietly sipping sparkling water, observing the deep cracks in their golden facade. I noticed how Bradley's hands shook slightly when he signed the wine list. I noticed how Vanessa overcompensated, laughing too loud at jokes that were not funny, and touching her diamond earrings too often, as if to prove they were real. They were putting on a masterclass in deception, and I was the only one in the room holding the true ledger. The dinner dragged on for 2 excruciating hours. It was an ostentatious display of loud wealth and hollow validation. Bradley and Vanessa ordered 3 bottles of vintage champagne, toasting to their own brilliance every 15 minutes. They feasted on dry-aged Wagyu steaks and butter-poached lobster tails, loudly boasting about the commercial tower they were supposedly breaking ground on next month. To anyone else, they looked like the pinnacle of financial success. But I watched the desperate hunger in my parents' eyes as they clung to Bradley's every word. Thomas and Patricia needed this fake success to validate their own status in the megachurch community. They needed Vanessa's glittering lifestyle to prove to their congregation that their parenting was flawless and divinely blessed. I ordered a simple salad and a black coffee, eating in absolute silence as the chaos of their egos swirled around me. I listened patiently as Bradley continuously dropped subtle insults wrapped in business jargon, implying my life in New York was a sad, lonely existence because I had not married a wealthy developer like Vanessa had. He spoke over me, interrupted me, and tried to make me feel small. Finally, the plates were cleared by the attentive waitstaff, and the dessert plates were pushed aside. The general manager of the restaurant approached the table holding a thick black leather folio. He placed it carefully near the center of the table, right between Vanessa and Bradley, with a polite bow. Vanessa did not even open it. She picked up the leather folio and slid it directly across the polished wood, stopping it right in front of my coffee cup. "You never sent an anniversary gift, Rachel," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "You can cover this tonight. Consider it payback for Mom and Dad putting a roof over your head before you ran off and abandoned your family." The table fell silent again. The investors looked mildly uncomfortable, but fascinated by the family drama unfolding before them. Patricia nodded in agreement, her lips pursed tightly as she glared at me. "It is the least you can do, Rachel," Patricia added, crossing her arms over her chest. "We paid for your braces, your food, your clothes. We gave you a respectable home. And then you turn your back on the church and on us to live a godless life in a strange city. Paying for a celebratory dinner is basic respect." I looked down at the leather folio. I calmly opened it. The total printed at the bottom was $4,280. A sum that would have completely devastated the terrified teenager who left home 14 years ago with nothing but a duffel bag. A sum that my family fully believed would humiliate me today, making me beg for forgiveness, admit defeat, or run out crying. I looked up, meeting Vanessa's smug gaze. My voice when I spoke was dangerously quiet and razor-sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. "Payback?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "That is an interesting word choice, Vanessa. Would you like to discuss the concept of payback right now in front of your esteemed guests?" Vanessa crossed her arms, her fake smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "I have no idea what you are talking about. Just pay the bill, Rachel, if you even have the credit limit for it. Do not embarrass us." I did not touch my purse. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, projecting total dominance. "Let us talk about payback." I continued, my tone completely conversational, but carrying a lethal edge. "Let us talk about the summer of 2010. You were preparing for your debutante ball, your grand entrance into high society. But Mom and Dad had a slight problem. The church youth fund fell short that year, and there was no money for your custom silk gown. Do you remember who paid for that gown, Vanessa?" Vanessa's smile completely dropped her eyes, darting quickly toward the investors who were suddenly hanging on my every word. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. I did not lower my voice. "Do you remember who worked back-to-back night shifts at the 24-hour diner, scrubbing grease off grills until 3 in the morning, just to hand over $2,000 in cash so you could walk down those stairs looking like a princess? I paid for that dress. I paid for your car insurance when you wrecked your car and begged me not to tell Dad so you would not lose your driving privileges. I paid for your silence and your vanity until I had nothing left to give, and then you called me selfish for leaving to go to college on a full academic scholarship that I earned myself. Thomas slammed his heavy fist onto the table, making the silverware rattle violently against the glass. Enough, he barked, using his booming pulpit voice designed to strike fear into his congregation. You will not disrespect your sister in my presence. We are a family of faith, and you will honor our traditions. You owe us for the life we gave you. I looked at the man who called himself a man of God. The man who cared more about the optics of his congregation and his personal wealth than the well-being of his own child. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied smoothly. And I certainly do not finance vanity. I closed the leather folio and pushed it directly back across the table until it hit Bradley's water glass, spilling a few drops onto the immaculate tablecloth. I do not pay for food I was not invited to eat. Bradley's face turned a mottled shade of red. He grabbed the folio angrily, pulling out a heavy platinum credit card from his designer wallet and tossing it onto the table with an arrogant scoff. You are pathetic, Rachel, he sneered, trying to regain control of the room. You always have been, trying to ruin a celebration because you are bitter and broke. I will handle this. It is a business expense anyway. Real money, something you clearly do not understand and never will. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. I set the cup down silently, watching Bradley motion aggressively for the manager to take his card. The investors looked away, trying to pretend they had not just witnessed the ugly underbelly of their golden couple. I knew something they did not. I knew exactly what was about to happen next, and I was going to savor every single second of the fallout. The general manager of the restaurant, a distinguished older man in a tailored suit, stepped back into the private dining room. He carried the black leather folio with a stiffness that immediately caught my attention. The subtle shift in the room's energy was palpable. The clinking of silverware stopped. The quiet jazz music playing through the overhead speakers suddenly felt too loud. Patricia leaned across the table, her eyes blazing with that familiar righteous fury she usually saved for sinners at Sunday service. You are an embarrassment, she whispered harshly, leaning close so the investors would not hear. We invite you to share in your sister's prosperity, and you act like a petulant child. You always had to ruin everything. You cannot stand to see Vanessa happy. I do not finance vanity, I replied smoothly, picking up my clutch. And I certainly do not pay for food I was not invited to eat. Enjoy the rest of your celebration. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored skirt. As I turned toward the heavy glass doors, the general manager bypassed the waiter and walked directly up to Bradley. He leaned down, his voice meant to be a discreet whisper, but in the dead silence of the room, his words echoed off the glass walls. Sir, I am terribly sorry, but all 3 of your platinum cards have declined. Your bank just informed our merchant service that your accounts were frozen 10 minutes ago. Bradley's spray tan seemed to evaporate, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. Declined, he sputtered, his forced southern drawl completely disappearing into a panicked squeak. That is impossible. Run it again. I have millions in those accounts. Do you know who I am? We called the authorization line, sir. The manager said, his tone polite but unyielding. They were very clear. The freeze is absolute. Vanessa snatched the folio, opening it as if the printed receipt would magically change. She looked at her father. Thomas was staring at Bradley with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The investors, the very men Bradley was trying to impress, suddenly found their phones incredibly interesting. One of them subtly signaled his assistant near the door, preparing to quietly exit the disaster. I did not stay to watch them scramble for loose cash or beg the investors to cover the tip. I simply pushed the glass doors open and walked out into the warm Atlanta night. The valet stand at the front of the restaurant was busy, but the valet captain recognized me immediately. He spoke quickly into his earpiece. I barely had time to enjoy the cool evening breeze before the restaurant doors burst open behind me. The sharp, aggressive clicking of Vanessa's heels hit the pavement, followed by Bradley's heavy, frantic footsteps. Rachel, Vanessa shrieked, abandoning her carefully cultivated high society persona entirely. What did you do? I turned around slowly. They looked ridiculous. Bradley was sweating profusely, his expensive suit jacket flapping open while Vanessa pointed a trembling manicured finger at my face. What did I do? I asked, tilting my head. I had a cup of black coffee and left. You are the ones who cannot pay your tab. Do not play dumb with me, you arrogant brat, Bradley snarled, stepping entirely too close into my personal space. The scent of panic and expensive scotch radiated off him. You work in private equity. You used some dirty corporate trick to flag my accounts. You reported a false fraud claim, did not you? You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to drag us down because you will never belong in our world. He pointed a thick finger at my chest, his voice dripping with unearned white privilege and fragile ego. You do not understand how the real world of high finance operates, Rachel. I am holding a $50 million commercial development in the palm of my hand. This little glitch with my cards is nothing but a banking error, a temporary hold. I will have my lawyers fix it before midnight, and then I am coming after you for defamation. Vanessa crossed her arms, nodding vigorously. You are sick, Rachel. Mom is right. You have always been a stain on this family. Wait until the church board hears how you tried to sabotage your own brother-in-law. I let them talk. I let them exhaust their pathetic, empty threats because I knew something they were desperately trying to ignore. Real power does not need to shout in a restaurant parking lot. Right on cue. A sleek midnight black Maybach glided silently up to the valet stand. The vehicle was completely bulletproof, custom-ordered, and cost more than the initial seed money Bradley had begged from my parents to start his failing company. The valet captain rushed to open the rear passenger door, but the window rolled down first, revealing Marcus sitting inside. Marcus, my brilliant corporate attorney and most trusted ally, looked up from a glowing tablet. He wore a crisp navy suit and a smile that could freeze water. Everything secured, Rachel, he asked, his voice smooth and professional. Everything is perfectly on schedule, Marcus, I replied. Vanessa's jaw dropped as she stared at the $500,000 vehicle and then at me. Bradley took a step back, his blustering confidence suddenly punctured by the undeniable display of wealth that far exceeded his rented lifestyle. Whose car is that? Vanessa stammered, her eyes wide. Rachel, how can you afford this? I did not answer her. I turned my attention back to Bradley, looking him dead in the eye. All the humor drained from my face, leaving only cold calculation. A glitch, I said, repeating his word back to him with surgical precision. Is that what you are calling a federal investigation these days, Bradley? Because from where I sit, it looks a lot less like a banking error and a lot more like wire fraud. Best of luck explaining your $50 million glitch to the feds when they start asking about your offshore shell companies. Bradley stopped breathing. He actually stopped breathing. The color completely drained from his face and he stumbled backward, hitting the hood of a parked car. I strongly suggest you figure out how to pay your restaurant bill, I added smoothly, stepping into the immaculate leather interior of the Maybach. Because tomorrow morning you will not even be able to afford a cup of coffee. I pulled the door shut, blocking out the sound of Vanessa screaming my name. As the heavy soundproof glass glided up, I settled back into the plush seat. Marcus handed me a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. The freeze was executed flawlessly, Marcus reported, tapping his screen. Bradley's domestic accounts are locked. The parent company liquidity is officially in default. Good, I said, watching my sister and her husband shrinking in the rearview mirror, fighting with each other in the parking lot. Tell the audit team to be ready at his brokerage firm by 6 in the morning. I want them clearing out that office before the sun comes up. And your parents? Marcus asked, carefully noting the lack of emotion in my voice. They made their choice 14 years ago, I replied, staring out at the passing city lights. Now they get to live with the consequences. Bring it all down, Marcus. The heavy glass doors of Prestige Real Estate Group shattered the Monday morning quiet as Vanessa marched into the reception area. The lingering humiliation from Saturday night's restaurant disaster radiated off her in visible waves of toxic energy. She threw her oversized designer tote onto the immaculate marble reception desk. Her assistant, a young woman named Sydney, instinctively flinched, spilling a drop of coffee on her notepad. Get this mess cleaned up right now, Vanessa snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the tiny brown stain, and cancel all my morning showings. I have spent the entire weekend dealing with Bradley's incompetent banking issues, and I refuse to speak to any clients until my headache goes away. Sydney nodded, frantically typing on her keyboard. Yes, Mom. Also, your husband called 3 times on the private line. He sounded panicked. Vanessa rolled her eyes, grabbing a stack of luxury property brochures. Bradley is always panicked when he does not get his way. Tell him I am in a meeting. I am not listening to another rant about how the Federal Reserve is supposedly targeting his commercial developments. It is just a temporary freeze, and I will not let his fragile ego ruin my morning. Vanessa strutted toward her corner office, a sprawling glass-walled sanctuary that overlooked the downtown Atlanta skyline. It was an office built entirely on our parents' financial backing, a safety net. She proudly paraded as self-made success. She had barely sat down in her ergonomic leather chair when the private elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. It was not a client, it was Marcus. He stepped onto the pristine hardwood floor, wearing a flawless tailored navy suit, holding a thick black binder. Behind him walked four forensic auditors, dressed in identical dark suits, carrying heavy briefcases. They moved with military precision, instantly fanning out across the brokerage floor. One auditor walked directly to the IT server room. Another stood by the main exit. Vanessa stood up, her face flushing with immediate rage. She stormed out of her office, her heels clicking aggressively. "Excuse me," she shouted, her voice echoing across the open floor plan. "Who let you in here? This is a private luxury brokerage, not a public plaza. Security is supposed to vet everyone downstairs." Marcus did not blink. He walked calmly toward her, stopping just outside her office door. He placed the heavy black binder directly onto the reception desk, right next to Vanessa's designer bag. "Good morning, Vanessa," he said, his voice carrying the calm, lethal efficiency of a seasoned corporate executioner. "My name is Marcus. I represent the primary shareholder of Apex Holdings, the parent corporation that underwrites this entire brokerage." Vanessa crossed her arms, leaning back and letting out a sharp, condescending laugh. "You have got to be kidding me. I know the CEO of Apex Holdings personally. We play tennis at the country club. My parents have donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to his favorite charities. He would never send a group of random suits to disrupt my business. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." Marcus opened the binder, flipping to a document stamped with a bright red seal. He tapped the paper with a silver pen. "You knew the former CEO of Apex Holdings. As of 6 o'clock this morning, Apex Holdings was acquired in a hostile takeover. The board was dissolved and all executive leadership was immediately replaced. The new primary shareholder initiated a full audit of all subsidiary assets exactly 2 hours ago." Vanessa scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "That is impossible. Corporate acquisitions of that size take months of negotiations. You are lying. You are just one of Rachel's little friends trying to scare me because she threw a temper tantrum at the restaurant. Tell my pathetic sister her petty tricks will not work in the real world of high finance." Marcus slid the document across the marble counter. "You can verify the signatures yourself, Vanessa. This is a notice of immediate asset seizure. This brokerage operates under a liquidity covenant that requires you to maintain a minimum of $2 million in operational capital. Because your husband Bradley illegally leveraged this brokerage's accounts to cross-collateralize his failing commercial real estate projects, your operational capital is currently sitting at negative $400,000. The color began to drain from Vanessa's face, but her narcissism refused to let her surrender. She grabbed the document, her eyes darting across the legal jargon. "Bradley said the funds were just temporarily reallocated," she muttered, her voice losing its aggressive edge. "It was a bridge loan. We are closing a $50 million deal this week. The money will be back by Friday." "There is no $50 million deal," Vanessa Marcus stated bluntly. "Bradley's shell companies are currently being investigated for severe federal wire fraud. The temporary freeze on his accounts is now a permanent federal injunction. You are in direct breach of your financial covenants. As a result, the parent company is immediately liquidating this brokerage to recover lost assets." Vanessa dropped the paper, gripping the edge of the desk. "You cannot do this. I built this company. My name is on the wall." "Your parents' money built this company," Marcus corrected, "and your husband's greed destroyed it. You have exactly 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. The auditors are currently securing all company servers' hard drives and physical files. If you attempt to remove any corporate documents or contact any clients, you will be charged with obstruction." "This is insane!" Vanessa shrieked, her carefully crafted facade shattering completely. She grabbed her desk phone, her hands shaking violently. "I am calling the CEO of Apex right now. I will tell him exactly what kind of illegal harassment his new auditors are pulling. My father is a powerful man in this city. When he finds out you are targeting our family business, he will destroy your career." Marcus stepped back, gesturing politely toward the phone. "Please go ahead. The contact number for the new CEO is listed on the second page of that binder. I highly recommend putting the call on speaker so your staff can hear the transition protocols." Vanessa flipped furiously to the second page, punching the 10-digit number into her desk phone with aggressive force. She slammed the speaker button, her chest heaving as the line began to ring. The entire office was dead silent. Sydney, the assistant, was practically holding her breath. The phone rang twice. A soft click echoed through the speaker, followed by the ambient sound of a busy New York street. Apex Holdings executive office, a calm, familiar voice answered. Vanessa froze. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she recognized the voice instantly. The phone slipped slightly in her trembling hand. Rachel. Vanessa whispered the name, sounding like a plea for mercy. There was a brief pause on the line. Then my voice filled the quiet brokerage floor, crisp, clear, and completely devoid of sympathy. "I told you I do not finance vanity, Vanessa," I replied through the speaker. "Your husband used your company as a piggy bank for his fraudulent schemes, and you looked the other way because you liked the designer shoes he bought you. Did you really think you could mock my career while secretly drowning in debt?" "Rachel, please!" Vanessa begged, her voice cracking into a desperate sob. "You cannot do this. I am pregnant. You are throwing your own pregnant sister out on the street. Think about Mom and Dad. Think about the family image." I took a slow sip of my coffee, my voice echoing coldly through the room. "You are not pregnant, Vanessa. I saw the calendar invite on your synced cloud account for your cosmetic surgery scheduled next Thursday. You have been lying to Bradley, and you have been lying to the family. And as for the family image, the only thing I am thinking about right now is how quickly you need to pack your desk. You have 55 minutes left, Vanessa. I suggest you start finding a box." The silence that fell over the luxury brokerage was absolute. Sydney, the assistant, stopped breathing entirely. Vanessa stared at the glowing speakerphone on her pristine marble desk as if it had just turned into a venomous snake. The color drained from her face, leaving her designer contour looking harsh and unnatural under the modern geometric lighting. "This is a sick joke!" Vanessa sputtered, her voice pitching into a shrill register that she normally reserved for berating service workers. "You hired some low-level actors to prank my office lines. You are not a CEO, Rachel. You are a bitter, mid-level numbers pusher who wears boring suits and lives in a shoebox apartment. I know the actual owner of this parent company. He plays golf with Bradley." "I used to play golf with Bradley," I corrected smoothly, listening to her desperation echo through the line. "He also had a severe liquidity crisis that my firm has been secretly monitoring for 8 months. When Bradley maxed out your company credit lines to cover his failing commercial developments, he triggered a catastrophic default clause. My firm bought the debt for pennies on the dollar at dawn. You do not own a luxury brokerage, Vanessa. You own a toxic liability, and I just foreclosed on it." Vanessa slammed her hands onto the marble desk, rattling her gold-plated pen holder. "You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. Mom and Dad gave me the seed money for this firm. It is family property. I am a self-made woman, and you will not take that away from me because you are jealous and alone." Self-made. I let the words hang in the air, allowing the forensic auditors in the room to hear exactly what was happening. "Your entire business model is a mirage, Vanessa. You did not get seed money from our parents' personal savings. You got a $500,000 unsecured loan funneled directly from the Church Community Outreach Fund. Money meant for affordable housing initiatives in our neighborhood went straight into your Italian leather sofas and aggressive billboard campaigns." A collective gasp rippled across the open floor plan. The few remaining real estate agents who had been pretending not to listen suddenly looked up from their dual monitors. Sydney backed away from the reception desk, her eyes wide with shock. She grabbed her purse, realizing instantly that her paycheck was tied to stolen community funds. "Shut up," Vanessa screamed, slamming her hand near the speakerphone but careful not to disconnect the call. "You are lying. You have always been a jealous liar." "Marcus, step in," I commanded. Marcus adjusted his tailored cuffs and stepped forward smoothly, sliding a thick stack of printed wire transfers across the marble surface. The documents are right here, Vanessa. We have the complete routing history. Bradley used this brokerage as a shell to cross-collateralize his commercial loans. By Friday, you will be officially bankrupt. By Monday, you will likely be indicted by federal authorities. One of the auditors, a tall woman with zero tolerance for dramatic displays, stepped out of the glass-walled conference room. "Mr. Marcus," she called out, holding a laptop. "We found the secondary ledgers on the local server. They were hidden under a dummy vendor account, but they confirm massive capital drains over the last 4 quarters. It matches the church fund discrepancies perfectly." Vanessa lunged forward, her manicured hands grasping wildly for the laptop. "You cannot look at those. Those are private high-net-worth client records. Give that back to me right now." Marcus stepped seamlessly between Vanessa and the auditor, blocking her path without breaking a sweat. "I strongly advise against touching my staff, Vanessa. Unless you want to add physical assault and obstruction of a federal financial audit to your rapidly growing list of charges, I suggest you step back and keep your hands to yourself." Marcus looked over at the terrified assistant and the stunned real estate agents. "By authorization of the new ownership, all regular employees will receive 2 months severance pay if you quietly pack your belongings and leave the premises within the next 10 minutes. Do not take any corporate files." The staff did not hesitate. They grabbed their coats and bolted for the glass doors, leaving Vanessa completely isolated in the center of her crumbling empire. Vanessa backed away, her chest heaving. The perfect golden child facade had completely shattered, leaving behind a terrified woman who suddenly realized her unearned privilege could no longer protect her. She grabbed her phone from the desk, abandoning the speakerphone entirely, and began frantically swiping through her contacts. "I am calling Dad," she threatened, her voice trembling as she hit the dial button. "He will fix this. He will have the church lawyers bury you in so much litigation you will never work in finance again. You are dead to this family, Rachel." I listened to her desperate threats through the open line. "Call him," I said softly. "Ask him how he plans to explain the missing community funds to the church elders when my audit goes public tonight. Ask him how he plans to protect his pristine megachurch reputation when his congregation finds out their tithes paid for your luxury vacations to the Maldives." Marcus checked his watch, a sleek silver timepiece that caught the morning light. "You have exactly 40 minutes left to vacate the premises, Vanessa. My team will provide you with 1 standard cardboard box for your personal items. Everything else belongs to Apex Holdings now." Vanessa ignored him, pressing the phone tight against her ear. "Dad," she cried out the moment the line connected, instantly adopting the high-pitched, helpless tone she had used since childhood to get exactly what she wanted. "You have to come down to the office right now. Rachel has lost her mind. She is trying to steal my company. You have to stop her." Even through the speakerphone, I could hear the heavy, frantic breathing of our father on the other end of the line. There was no booming pastoral authority in his voice today. There was only raw, unfiltered panic. "I cannot help you right now." Vanessa Thomas rasped his words, tumbling over each other in a hurried, chaotic rush. "The Church Finance Committee just called an emergency meeting. Someone leaked our internal banking records to the Board of Elders overnight. They are asking questions about the outreach accounts. They are asking about Bradley's loans. I do not know how they found out." Vanessa's phone slipped slightly from her ear. She stared at Marcus, and then slowly looked down at the speakerphone where I was still listening quietly. Rachel Thomas yelled through Vanessa's phone, his voice echoing across the silent, empty brokerage. "I know you are behind this. I demand that you come to my office at the church immediately. Do you hear me? We are going to settle this family dispute right now before you ruin everything we have built." I smiled, leaning back in my ergonomic chair in New York. "I will see you in an hour, Dad. Have your prayers ready." I walked through the towering glass doors of Grace and Truth Fellowship exactly 59 minutes later. Italian marble floors spanned the massive lobby, leading to stadium seating for 10,000 worshippers. This was a corporate fortress, built on the backs of working-class parishioners who genuinely believed their tithes bought them a piece of heaven. I bypassed the 2 armed security guards who recognized me, but looked terrified to intervene. My father's executive assistant physically blocked the hallway. I did not break my stride as Marcus stepped directly into her path, allowing me to push open the heavy double doors myself. Thomas sat behind a massive mahogany desk that looked like it belonged to an oil baron. The room smelled of expensive cigar smoke and imported leather. He was pacing furiously with a wireless earpiece blinking barking panicked orders about asset transfers. When he saw me, he tapped the earpiece and ended the call abruptly. His face shifted instantly from a terrified debtor to a righteous patriarch. It was a terrifyingly smooth transition, a performance he perfected over 30 years in the pulpit. "Sit down right now, Rachel," he commanded, pointing his heavy gold-ringed finger toward a stiff leather chair opposite his desk. "We are going to end this vindictive crusade right now." I did not sit. I closed the heavy oak doors behind me, shutting out the frantic noise of the administrative wing. "I prefer to stand, Dad. You have gone entirely too far." He boomed, his voice resonating with that practiced theatrical authority meant to demand absolute obedience. "Taking over your sister's company, sending corporate thugs to harass her while she conducts legitimate business. You are acting out of pure spite, and I will not allow you to drag this family's good name through the mud." "Her company was a toxic liability built on fraud," I replied. "I simply foreclosed on bad debt. It is business. You should understand the collection of dues." He slammed his hand on the desk. "The scripture commands us to love and protect our kin, but you have always rejected our teachings. You ran away to New York to chase secular money and left your faith behind. And for what? Look at yourself, Rachel." He gestured toward me with a look of profound, exaggerated pity. "You are 32 years old and completely alone. You have no husband to guide you. You have no children. You have nothing but a cold apartment and a bank account. You are attacking Vanessa because you are intensely jealous of her life. She found a successful man who provides for her, and you cannot stand that you will never have what she has." The sheer audacity of his words was impressive. He was using the exact same psychological playbook he had used when I was a teenager, telling me my worth as a Black woman was entirely dependent on my ability to secure a prosperous marriage within their approved elite social circles. I let his hollow words hang in the silent office. I walked slowly past the leather chair he had ordered me into and stepped directly into his personal space behind the desk. He stiffened, visibly expecting me to yell or cry. Instead, I ran my fingers lightly over the polished wood of his desk, stopping at a row of gleaming crystal golf trophies lined up on his credenza. "First place at the exclusive Heritage Invitational." I read aloud, picking up a heavy crystal cup, "a country club that did not even allow minorities through the front door until the late 90s. The initiation fee alone is $100,000. How exactly does a humble servant of the local community afford to play 18 holes there every Tuesday, Dad?" "Put that down." He snapped, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "My recreational activities are none of your concern. They are generous gifts from grateful congregants." "Grateful congregants," I repeated, setting the trophy down with a sharp, deliberate clink. "Is that what you call the elderly women on fixed incomes who drop their Social Security checks into your collection plates every Sunday?" "You know absolutely nothing about church finances," he growled, trying to regain his dominant posture. "We are audited annually by independent accounting firms. Firms that Bradley recommended," I assume I countered, watching his eyes dart nervously toward the door. "Firms that conveniently overlook how you use the Community Outreach Fund as collateral for Bradley's failing commercial real estate projects. You told your congregation you were building affordable housing, but those funds were quietly transferred into an offshore holding account to keep Bradley from declaring bankruptcy last year." Thomas gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning a pale grayish tone. "You have no proof of that. You are throwing around wild, baseless accusations to destroy this family's legacy." "I do not need to destroy it," I whispered, stepping incredibly close so he could hear the absolute certainty in my voice. "You and Bradley already did that. I am just the repo woman coming to collect the keys. And speaking of Bradley, where is he? Have you noticed he has not answered a single one of Vanessa's calls since the auditors showed up? He is securing emergency capital." Thomas insisted, his voice lacking conviction. "He is negotiating a bridge loan to resolve the temporary liquidity issue. When he does, he will buy back Vanessa's firm, and I will make sure you are permanently banned from doing business in this city." "A bridge loan." I laughed softly. "Dad, no bank will lend Bradley another dime. The $50 million deal he bragged about was a complete fabrication. He is underwater, and he is dragging you down with him because your signature is on the guarantor line of every single fraudulent loan. Thomas swayed, his immaculate posture breaking under the weight of my words. He opened his mouth to quote another scripture, but the heavy oak doors of the office burst open. The heavy oak doors of the office had barely settled into their frame before Patricia's immaculate facade began to crack. She stared at the thick stack of medical and financial documents resting on the polished mahogany desk. The pristine Chanel suit she wore suddenly seemed to suffocate her as she reached out with a trembling hand, pulling the top paper toward her. It was the intake form from a highly exclusive Beverly Hills plastic surgery clinic. The patient name was clearly printed as Vanessa Sterling, and the procedure, a full abdominoplasty, was bolded right next to a non-refundable $50,000 deposit receipt. "You are fabricating this!" Patricia gasped, her voice dropping its usual melodic cadence and snapping into a defensive hiss. "Your sister would never lie about a child. She has been glowing all morning talking about nursery color palettes. You hacked into a database and forged these forms just to spite her because she found a good man and you have nobody." "I did not have to hack into anything, Mother," I replied, keeping my posture relaxed while they unraveled. "The payment was flagged by my audit team because the $50,000 did not come from Vanessa's personal checking account. It was wired directly from the church's youth scholarship fund. You know, the one you personally oversee to help underprivileged high school seniors buy laptops for college. Tell me, Patricia, did you authorize the wire transfer? Or did Vanessa forge your signature the same way Bradley forged his quarterly earnings reports?" Patricia physically recoiled, taking a step backward until her heels hit the edge of the leather sofa. She looked at Thomas, waiting for him to unleash his pastoral fury, to banish me from the room and protect their carefully curated reality. But Thomas was not looking at the medical records. He was staring blindly at the loan guarantee documents I had placed right beside them. His hands shook as he picked up the commercial loan agreement. His bold, sweeping signature, the same one he used to sign baptism certificates and marriage licenses, was clearly visible on the bottom line. He had legally bound the church's entire liquid asset portfolio to Bradley's phantom $50 million real estate development. "I can explain this," Rachel Thomas stammered, the booming authority completely erased from his throat. "Bradley came to me with a vision, a community empowerment initiative. He said the downtown zoning board was blocking him because he did not have local minority backing. He said if the church partnered with him as a guarantor, we would receive a 20% equity stake in the commercial tower. It was meant to double the church endowment. We could have built a new community center. I was securing our financial future. You handed a white developer the keys to a black megachurch so he could use your congregation as a human shield against federal regulators." I said my words, slicing through the cigar-scented air like a razor. "Bradley did not need your minority backing to appease a zoning board, Dad. He needed your pristine, untaxed institutional credit rating because every major bank in Atlanta had already blacklisted him for defaulting on his previous commercial loans. He saw you coming from a mile away. A prideful pastor desperate to maintain the illusion of generational wealth, and he played you perfectly." "That is a lie!" Patricia shrieked, abandoning her sophisticated composure entirely. "Bradley is a visionary. He respects this family. He honors your father. He provides for your sister. You are just a bitter, vindictive woman trying to tear down black excellence because you sold your soul to corporate America." Black excellence. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that made both of them flinch. Mother, you are defending a man who refers to this neighborhood as a demographic transition zone behind your back. A man who just drained your entire community outreach fund to pay for his spray tans and country club dues. You handed over the hard-earned tithes of single mothers and retired school teachers so Vanessa could pretend she was royalty on social media. There is no excellence here. There is only fraud, and you are holding the bag. Thomas dropped the papers back onto the desk, running a hand over his face. He looked out the massive arched window overlooking the sprawling church campus he had spent 30 years building. The parking lot was full of parishioners arriving for the midweek service, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had been mortgaged to a sinking ship. "How bad is it?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "If your firm pulls the funding, how much are we liable for?" My firm already pulled the funding, Dad, I stated, adjusting the cuff of my blazer. And you are liable for all of it. $32 million in defaulted commercial debt. The bank is preparing the foreclosure notices for the church properties as we speak. They will start with the community center, then move to the administrative wing, and finally they will take the sanctuary itself. Patricia let out a strangled cry, sinking onto the leather sofa and burying her face in her hands. "We will be ruined," she sobbed, rocking back and forth. "The congregation will turn on us. The news channels will camp out on our front lawn. We will lose our home, our standing, everything. Rachel, you have to stop this. You work for these people. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them Bradley acted alone." "I cannot stop a federal financial avalanche, Mother," I replied, looking down at her perfectly coiffed hair. "And even if I could, I would not. You made me the scapegoat of this family for 14 years because I refused to play a part in your hypocritical performances. You threw me out with a garbage bag full of clothes because I wanted to build real wealth instead of praying for a miracle payout. Now you are begging the very daughter you discarded to save you from the golden child you worshipped." Thomas stood up, a sudden, desperate energy returning to his eyes. "There has to be a way to restructure the debt. Bradley is hosting an emergency capital raise at the Piedmont Country Club this afternoon. He told me he has 3 private equity angels ready to inject cash into the project. If he secures that funding, we can cover the margin call before the feds finalize the injunction. We just need to buy him 24 hours. I looked at my father, marveling at his endless capacity for self-delusion. He was still clinging to the sinking anchor, believing Bradley would miraculously pull them from the depths. "Bradley is not raising capital at the country club, Dad," I said, picking up my briefcase and snapping the brass latches shut. "He is panhandling to his old boy network, trying to find a sucker willing to catch a falling knife. But unfortunately for him, his audience is about to get a very loud, highly educated lesson in federal securities fraud." I turned toward the heavy oak doors, feeling the suffocating weight of the office finally lift off my shoulders. "Do not bother waiting by the phone for Bradley's good news," I added, looking back over my shoulder at the 2 shattered figures in the room. "The country club is about to revoke his membership, and I am going to make sure he leaves out the back door." Bradley stood at the head of the long oak table in the founder's dining room of the Heritage Club. His usually crisp seersucker suit was clinging to his damp back. 4 elderly white men, the old money patriarchs of Atlanta real estate, sat reviewing the glossy prospectuses he had just handed them. "Gentlemen, the returns are fully insulated," Bradley promised, his voice carrying a desperate, forced joviality. "We are looking at a guaranteed 20% yield on the downtown commercial tower." The heavy mahogany doors swung open. I walked in wearing a bone-white bespoke suit that commanded the immediate attention of the room. The maitre d' hurried behind me, looking flustered but intensely deferential. Bradley paused mid-sentence, his jaw going slack. He blinked rapidly, assuming I had somehow sneaked past the heavy front gate security of this historically exclusionary institution. "You cannot be in here," Bradley hissed, stepping away from his investors. "This is a private members-only dining room. Security." I ignored him entirely. I pulled out a chair at the adjacent table directly in the eye line of his 4 investors. I handed my heavy, solid metal platinum founder's card to the maitre d'. "I believe my membership initiation cleared this morning," I said, projecting my voice with crystal clarity. $250,000 in cash tends to expedite the paperwork. I will take this corner table." The maitre d' bowed deeply. "Of course, Ms. Sterling. Welcome to the Heritage Club. May I bring you the wine list?" I crossed my legs, fixing my gaze on Bradley's investors. "No wine today," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a diamond cutter. "I need to keep my mind sharp. I will have the sea bass pan seared, and I would like it served immediately before the Federal Securities Commission freezes this club's accounts for hosting unregistered and fraudulent solicitations." The oldest investor, a man named Harrison, lowered his reading glasses. "Excuse me, young lady," he asked, his tone a mix of aristocratic offense and sudden curiosity. "Who exactly are you, and what are you implying about this pitch?" Bradley lunged forward, slamming his hand on his table. "Do not listen to her, Harrison. She is my disgruntled sister-in-law. She has mental health issues and a vendetta." I did not raise my voice. I leaned back in my chair and pulled a single sheet of paper from my briefcase, letting it rest on the pristine white tablecloth. My name is Rachel Sterling, Managing Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at Vanguard Equity in New York. And what I am implying, Harrison, is that the 20% yield Bradley just promised you is being funded by an illegal cross-collateralization of a non-existent escrow account. Bradley's face turned a dangerous shade of magenta. "Get her out of here," he yelled at the staff. The maitre d' stood frozen, terrified to offend a new platinum member who had just dropped $250,000 in cash. I kept my eyes locked on Harrison. "Turn to page 4 of his prospectus," I instructed. "Notice the holding company listed for the downtown tower. It is called Zenith Properties. If you run a basic corporate registry search, which my team did at 6 this morning, you will find Zenith Properties has exactly 0 capital assets. It is a hollow shell. Bradley is using this lunch to solicit your capital to pay off a massive margin call on a completely different defaulted retail park in Buckhead. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the feds are already watching Peter." The 4 men at the table looked at the glossy brochures in their hands, and then up at Bradley. The sweat was now visibly pouring down Bradley's temples, ruining his carefully crafted image of wealthy Southern charm. "It is a complex financial structure," Bradley stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "It is a standard bridge loan mechanism. You know how these commercial deals operate, gentlemen." Harrison tossed the prospectus onto the table like it was diseased. "A bridge loan requires an actual bridge, Bradley. This looks like a cliff." Harrison stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a look of absolute disgust. "My firm has 0 tolerance for commingled funds. Do not ever contact my office again." The other 3 men stood in unison, tossing their booklets down and following Harrison out of the room without a backward glance. As the heavy mahogany doors closed behind the investors, Bradley completely lost his mind. His mask of refined gentility shattered, revealing the ugly, entitled, and deeply racist core underneath. He charged at my table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. "You stupid, arrogant witch!" he screamed, his face contorted in rage. "You think you can just walk into my club with your affirmative action corporate title and destroy my life? You do not belong here. You will never belong here. You and your whole flashy family are nothing but a joke to real money." He raised his hand, balling it into a heavy fist. Before he could even shift his weight forward, 2 massive private security contractors in plain clothes materialized from the hallway. I had hired them the moment I landed in Atlanta. They grabbed Bradley by his shoulders, twisting his arms behind his back with brutal efficiency and slamming him face first onto the linen-covered table. Silverware crashed to the hardwood floor. I did not flinch. I took a calm sip from my water glass, stood up, and leaned down so my lips were mere inches from his ear. "You thought marrying into a prominent black family made you untouchable," I whispered softly, ensuring only he could hear the lethal promise in my voice. "You thought our generational wealth was just a piggy bank for your mediocre white entitlement. But you made one fatal miscalculation, Bradley. You got sloppy." He struggled against the guards, but they pressed him harder against the wood. "My team did not just find the empty shell companies today," I continued, my tone devoid of any mercy. "We found the source of your original seed money. We traced the wire transfers going back 5 years. We found the hidden accounts." Bradley froze against the table, his breathing hitching in his throat. The angry red flush drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and terrified. "I know about the church," I said, letting the revelation drop like a guillotine blade. "I know exactly what my father did with the community outreach fund to keep your pathetic business afloat. And I am heading there right now to burn his pulpit to the ground." I signaled my security team with a brief nod. They released their grip on Bradley, letting him slide off the mahogany table and crumple onto the expensive dining room rug. He gasped for air, clutching his bruised shoulder, but he did not try to stand. The fight had been completely drained out of him, replaced by the paralyzing terror of a man who suddenly realized his white-collar immunity had just expired. I turned my back on him, adjusting my blazer, and walked out of the founder's dining room. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of his pathetic wheezing. I glided through the opulent corridors of the Heritage Club, ignoring the shocked stares of the elite members who were unaccustomed to seeing a black woman treat their sanctuary like a stepping stone. My driver was already waiting at the front entrance with the Maybach engine running. I climbed into the spacious back seat where Marcus was actively typing on his tablet. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, and he offered a rare razor-thin smile. The investors canceled their escrow transfers, Marcus reported as the car pulled smoothly out of the country club gates. Bradley's commercial accounts are officially overdrawn by $4 million. The federal system just flagged the deficit. Good, I replied, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water from the car's built-in console. Now target the root of the rot. Initiate the forensic audit on the Grace and Truth Fellowship community outreach accounts. I want every ledger, every hidden transfer, and every offshore routing number cracked wide open before we pull into the church parking lot. Marcus typed furiously, his fingers flying across the glowing screen. Your father has heavy encryption on the administrative servers, Rachel. It looks like he hired a private cybersecurity firm to mask the outflow of the congregation tithes. No firewall can hide $30 million in stolen equity, I said, my voice cold and absolute. Break the encryption, Marcus. Use the override codes from the parent company acquisition. My father legally tied the church assets to Vanessa's failing brokerage. That means I own his servers now, too. The drive to the church took 20 minutes. I spent the time reviewing the preliminary financial reports Marcus handed me. The sheer scale of my parents' hypocrisy was breathtaking. They had stood at the pulpit every Sunday for the last decade, preaching about sacrifice and community uplift. They had begged single mothers, college students, and elderly pensioners to give beyond their means, promising divine blessings in return. Meanwhile, they were funneling those exact donations into a shadow account to fund Bradley's fraudulent real estate ventures and Vanessa's luxury lifestyle. They had literally stolen the future of our community to finance a facade of black excellence. The Maybach pulled through the towering iron gates of the mega-church campus. The property was massive, a sprawling testament to religious capitalism, featuring a 10,000-seat sanctuary, a private television studio, and an administrative complex that rivaled a corporate headquarters. I stepped out of the car feeling the warm Atlanta sun on my face. I did not bother with the administrative entrance. I walked straight up the grand marble steps and pushed open the colossal double doors of the main sanctuary. The cavernous room was empty, except for two figures standing near the altar. My father Thomas was pacing back and forth across the elevated stage, barking frantically into his cell phone. My mother Patricia sat in the front, clutching her designer purse, her immaculate composure entirely shattered. They were panicking. News of Bradley's collapse at the country club had clearly already reached them. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the massive empty cathedral, announcing my arrival like a ticking clock. Thomas froze, dropping his phone to his side. He looked down at me from his elevated pulpit, his face a mask of desperation and forced authority. Rachel, he boomed, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. What have you done? Bradley just called me from the country club. He is raving about federal investigations and frozen accounts. You have crossed a sacred line today. You are attacking your own family. I stopped at the base of the altar, looking up at the man who had always demanded my absolute submission. I am not attacking my family, I replied, my voice carrying clearly without the need for a microphone. I am auditing a corrupt enterprise. And your books are bleeding, Dad. Patricia stood up, her hands trembling. How dare you come into the house of the Lord and speak to your father this way? She shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. We are trying to protect this family. We are trying to build generational wealth so we never have to struggle again. You ran away to New York. You abandoned us. You do not understand the pressure of maintaining our position in this city. I understand, math mother, I countered, taking a step closer to the stage. I understand that the $3 million the congregation raised last year for the Inner City Youth Academy never made it to the construction firm. I understand that you wired that exact amount to a Cayman Islands holding company registered to Bradley's name so Vanessa could buy a yacht and pretend she was royalty on social media. Thomas gripped the edges of the wooden pulpit, his knuckles turning white. That was an he stammered, trying to sound righteous. The church was going to receive a massive return on that capital. We were acting as silent partners to multiply our blessings. It was a bridge loan to help Bradley secure a $50 million development. We were going to build a new community center with the profits. There was no $50 million development, I said, delivering the final lethal blow. Bradley has been broke for 3 years. He used your community outreach fund to pay off his previous failed loans. It is a classic Ponzi scheme. Dad and you handed him the keys to the vault. He played you for a fool because he knew you were too obsessed with keeping up appearances to actually check his balance sheets. Patricia let out a strangled sob, sinking back into the pew. Thomas looked as if he had been physically struck. His broad shoulders slumped, and the booming pastoral presence evaporated, leaving behind a terrified old man facing federal prison. The banks are drafting the foreclosure notices right now, I continued mercilessly. Because you co-signed Bradley's loans, the creditors are coming for the church assets. They will take the administrative wing first, then the television studio, and finally they will take this sanctuary. Your entire empire is gone. Please, Rachel, Patricia begged, tears ruining her flawless makeup. You work in high finance. You are a managing director. You have the power to stop this. You can buy the debt. You can save the church. Think of the congregation. Think of the shame. We will lose everything. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was a disappointment because I refused to smile and play the dutiful, submissive daughter. I looked at the man who had preached forgiveness, but excommunicated me for choosing my own career over an arranged marriage. I already bought the debt, I said softly. Thomas looked up, a sudden desperate spark of hope igniting in his eyes. You bought the church's debt, he asked, his voice trembling with relief. You saved us, Rachel. I knew the Lord would speak to your heart. We can restructure. We can keep the sanctuary. I shook my head slowly, letting a cold, predatory smile touch my lips. You misunderstood me, Dad. I bought the debt. That means I own the church now. And the first thing the new ownership is doing is calling the authorities. Before Thomas could respond, the heavy sanctuary doors behind me crashed open. Vanessa sprinted down the aisle, her hair disheveled, her designer clothes rumpled. She looked completely unhinged. She pointed a shaking finger at our parents, screaming at the top of her lungs. Do not listen to her! Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing violently through the holy space. Rachel did not just freeze the accounts. Bradley just called me from the airport. He emptied your personal safe, Mom. He took the emergency cash reserves, and he is trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands right now. He is leaving us behind to take the fall. I did not even blink. I just turned to face my sister, my smile widening as the final piece of the trap snapped shut. Marcus walked through the sanctuary doors right behind Vanessa, holding a thick stack of printed banking ledgers. The heavy thud of his leather shoes against the marble aisle sounded like a judge's gavel. He did not look at my panicked sister or my devastated parents. He walked straight up to the altar and handed the documents directly to me. I held the heavy ledgers up so the stark black ink caught the late afternoon light streaming through the massive stained glass windows. You see, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. I knew Bradley was going to run. I counted on it. But before we talk about your fugitive son-in-law, let us talk about these numbers. Because Marcus and I spent the entire drive over here digging through the encrypted files you tried so desperately to hide behind your ecclesiastical firewall. Thomas sank heavily into the plush, velvet-lined clergy chair behind the pulpit. He looked like a deflated balloon, all his righteous fury completely drained, leaving only a terrified shell of a man. I flipped to the first page of the financial report. I expected to find gross negligence. I continued projecting my voice so it bounced off the vaulted ceilings of the empty megachurch. I expected to find that you co-signed a bad commercial loan because you were too arrogant to hire a real financial advisor. But this right here is so much darker than simple arrogance. This is a profound spiritual betrayal of thousands of hardworking people. Patricia stood up, her hands shaking violently as she smoothed the wrinkles from her designer skirt. We are the shepherds of this flock, Rachel, she argued, her voice trembling with delusion and toxic pride. We built this ministry from a tiny storefront operation into a 10,000-member congregation. The Lord provides for His anointed. If we utilize some operational capital to support our own family, it was only because we have sacrificed our entire adult lives for these people. We deserve our portion of the harvest. I slammed the heavy ledger down onto the solid wooden altar. The loud, sharp crack made Patricia flinch backward as if she had been struck. You did not take a portion, Mother. You bled them completely dry. I looked down at the highlighted columns. Let us read the itemized list together, shall we? The Single Mothers Ministry Fund has been depleted. The Senior Citizen Housing Initiative has been fully liquidated. The scholarship drive for first-generation college students is completely emptied. You stood at this very pulpit on Easter Sunday and asked elderly black women working minimum wage jobs to give their last $10 to the building fund. And the very next morning you wired that exact cash into Vanessa's personal checking account so she could buy a vacation condo in Miami. Vanessa froze her eyes, darting frantically between me and our parents. "What is she talking about, Mom?" Vanessa stammered, her perfectly manicured hands trembling. "The condo was paid for with my brokerage profits. Bradley told me it was a company bonus for our record-breaking quarter." I turned my absolute disgust toward my sister. "Your luxury brokerage never made a single dime of profit, Vanessa. You were operating at a massive loss for 3 straight years. Your entire glamorous lifestyle, your imported cars, your country club dues, your weekly designer shopping sprees was completely funded by the working-class parishioners of Grace and Truth Fellowship. You were wearing the grocery money of the exact same people you refused to make eye contact with at the supermarket." "No," Vanessa gasped, backing away from the altar and shaking her head violently, refusing to accept the collapse of her golden reality. "No, that is a lie. Bradley is a millionaire. He is a prominent commercial developer." "Bradley is a desperate con artist," I corrected sharply, cutting through her denial. "And Dad was his personal bank vault. When Bradley realized he could not get traditional financing, he manipulated your father into putting up the church's community outreach fund as collateral. But Thomas did not just guarantee the loan, he actively moved the cash. He committed federal wire fraud to keep his golden child living in absolute luxury while his other daughter was out in New York actually working for a living." Thomas buried his face in his hands. A low, guttural sob escaped his throat. "It is an abomination," he wept, the sound pathetic and hollow. "The devil clouded my judgment. I was just trying to protect my family. I could not let the city see my daughter fail. The shame would have completely destroyed my ministry." "Your ministry was a lie. The exact moment you decided optics mattered more than integrity," I said, stepping down from the altar to stand eye to eye with my father. "You weaponized faith. You used scripture to demand absolute loyalty from me, but you broke every commandment to protect a white man who saw your congregation as nothing but a giant automated teller machine." Patricia grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into the sleeve of my blazer. "Rachel, please," she begged, all her Southern Belle hostility replaced by sheer unadulterated terror. "You cannot let these ledgers go public. The deacons are already asking for an emergency meeting tonight. If the congregation finds out they funded Bradley's businesses, they will tear us apart. They will riot. The media will camp outside our house. We will be ruined. You have to use your private equity money to fill the accounts back up. You can afford it." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire childhood making me feel like an inadequate burden. She was still trying to use me. She still viewed my hard-earned wealth as a resource for her own salvation. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "I am not your savior, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. "And I am certainly not your wallet. I bought the debt to control the foreclosure, not to forgive it. The authorities already have these ledgers. Marcus transmitted the unencrypted files to the Internal Revenue Service and the State Attorney General 20 minutes ago." Thomas let out a horrific gasp, clutching his chest as he slumped further into his chair. Patricia stumbled backward, collapsing heavily into the front pew. Vanessa suddenly shrieked, grabbing her hair. "Bradley took the emergency cash," she screamed, pacing the center aisle like a caged animal. "He took the $200,000 from the church safe. He left me here with absolutely nothing. I have no company. I have no money. I am going to jail for fraud, and he is on a private plane to the Caribbean right now." I turned to Marcus, who checked his glowing tablet. "Marcus," I said softly, a smile playing on my lips, "is our fugitive brother-in-law enjoying his international flight?" Marcus smiled, a cold, calculating expression that promised absolute total ruin. "Actually, Rachel, he never made it to the departure gate. The federal agents intercepted Bradley at the TSA checkpoint," I said, finishing Marcus' sentence for him as the reality crashed down on my family. "He is currently sitting in a holding room at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, charged with international wire fraud and grand larceny." The church sanctuary erupted into a chorus of desperate wails. Patricia collapsed against the wooden pews, clutching her chest, while Thomas stared blankly at the stained glass windows, his entire empire reduced to ash. I did not stay to watch them mourn the consequences of their own actions. I turned on my heel and walked out the heavy doors, letting the warm afternoon sunlight hit my face. By 8 o'clock that evening, I was standing in the kitchen of my Buckhead penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of the Atlanta skyline, a glittering sea of lights that felt entirely under my control. I was wearing a simple silk lounge set, pouring a glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon when the private elevator chimed. I had instructed the lobby concierge to allow her up. I knew she would come. They always come when the money runs out. The stainless steel doors parted, and Vanessa stumbled into my foyer. The golden child of the family was completely unrecognizable. Her usually flawless silk press was matted to her forehead with sweat and tears. Her mascara was smeared heavily down her cheeks, staining the lapels of her white designer blazer. She had clearly been crying for hours. She looked like a drowning woman reaching for a life raft she had spent her entire life trying to sink. "Rachel," she sobbed, throwing her ruined handbag onto my entry bench and rushing toward the kitchen island. "Rachel, you have to help me. They froze my personal checking accounts. My credit cards are declining everywhere. I cannot even buy a bottle of water. The feds raided our house 2 hours ago. They took my jewelry, they took the cars, they took everything." I did not say a word. I reached into the glass front wine fridge, pulled out a second crystal glass, and poured a generous measure of Cabernet. I slid it across the marble countertop toward her. I wanted her to speak. I wanted to hear every single desperate excuse she had prepared. "Drink," I commanded softly. "You look dehydrated." Vanessa grabbed the glass with trembling hands, spilling a few drops of red wine onto the pristine white marble. She took a massive gulp and immediately launched into her performance. "It was Bradley," she cried, her voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. "He manipulated me, Rachel. He lied to me about the business. I had no idea he was moving money from the church. I swear to God, I thought his real estate deals were legitimate. He told me the market was just going through a temporary correction. I am a victim here. He used my name on the brokerage documents without explaining the liabilities. You have to save me. We are blood. We are sisters." I leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip of my wine. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable minute. I watched her chest heave as she waited for me to offer salvation. "Sisters," I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue like a foreign concept. "That is a fascinating word choice, Vanessa. Were we sisters when you told your country club friends I was just a distant cousin because you were embarrassed I took a bus to New York instead of pledging your sorority? Were we sisters when you stood in the kitchen and watched Mom and Dad kick me out with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes?" "That was different," she pleaded, gripping the edge of the island, her knuckles turning white. "We were young. Mom and Dad made those rules. I had to protect my own position in the house. I was just trying to survive their expectations, too. You know how they are. They demand perfection. You did not just survive, Vanessa. You thrived on my humiliation." I walked around the kitchen, slowly, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. "And as for Bradley manipulating you, do not insult my intelligence." I pulled a sleek silver folder from the drawer behind me and tossed it next to her wine glass. "You hold a master's degree in business administration. You signed the quarterly tax filings for your luxury brokerage. I saw your signature on the offshore routing authorizations. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You just did not care because it kept you draped in diamonds and sitting in the VIP section of every gala in Atlanta. You loved the fraud as long as it funded your superiority complex." Vanessa collapsed onto one of the velvet bar stools, burying her face in her hands. She let out a guttural, ugly sound. The polished, sophisticated real estate mogul was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified woman facing the complete destruction of her identity. "I have nothing left," she wailed, stripping away the final layer of her pride. "The scandal is going to be on the front page of the business journals tomorrow morning. All my friends have blocked my number. The country club revoked my membership via email an hour ago. I do not even have a place to sleep tonight. Rachel, please. I will do anything. I will work for you. I will clean your floors." Just do not let me go to federal prison. Do not let them take me away in handcuffs like they took Bradley. I watched the golden child, the woman who had spent 3 decades treating me like dirt, beneath her expensive stilettos, begging for her freedom in my kitchen. The satisfaction was absolute, but I kept my face entirely impassive. I reached into the silver folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper crisp and heavy with legal authority. I slid it across the marble directly over the spilled drops of red wine. I placed a gold fountain pen right beside it. "I will not let you go to prison, Vanessa," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "But salvation comes with a very specific price." I repeated his words aloud, letting them echo off the high ceilings of my penthouse. I pressed the speakerphone button, placing my device right next to the contract Vanessa was trembling over. "Marcus, repeat that for my sister," I said. "I want her to understand exactly what kind of man she married." Marcus' voice came through crisp and clinical. "The church security cameras caught him breaching the pastoral office 10 minutes ago. He bypassed the dual authentication on your father's private wall safe. He took approximately $200,000 in unrecorded cash donations. That was the emergency relief fund for the congregation. He was carrying a heavy duffel bag and his passport. His global positioning signal is currently pinging on Interstate 85, heading south toward the international terminal." Vanessa let out a sound that was less of a cry and more of a dying gasp. She grabbed the edge of my marble island, her knuckles turning completely white against the stone. "He left me," she whispered, staring blindly at the glass of red wine I had poured her. "He actually left me. He told me he was going to his attorney's office to draft a legal defense strategy. He told me to wait here and keep you distracted so we could save our assets." "And you believed him," I said, walking around the kitchen island to stand right beside her. "You believed the entitled white man who spent 3 years treating your black family like an endless credit line was going to suddenly develop a conscience. You thought he was going to sacrifice himself for a black woman facing federal indictment. Vanessa, you were never his partner. You were his human shield. And right now, he is tossing you to the wolves so he can drink rum on a beach in the Cayman Islands while you take the fall for his real estate fraud." Vanessa grabbed the gold fountain pen. Her hands were shaking so violently that the black ink splattered slightly against the thick paper. But she signed her name on the dotted line without hesitation. She signed away her marriage, her remaining assets, and her false innocence. She pushed the contract toward me, her mascara-stained face looking up with absolute hollow desperation. "I signed it," she choked out. "I gave you everything. Now please, Rachel, you have to stop him. You have to call the police before he gets on that plane." I picked up the contract, inspecting the messy signature. It was legally binding. I slipped it into my sleek silver folder. "I am not going to call the local police, Vanessa," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "That would be entirely too small for a crime of this magnitude." I opened my laptop, resting it on the marble surface. I tapped the screen, bringing up a live terminal interface that connected directly to the financial servers I now legally owned after the morning takeover. "Marcus," I said, directing my voice toward the phone. "Do we have confirmation on his flight details?" Marcus replied instantly. "Delta Flight 2904 direct to Grand Cayman. It departs in exactly 90 minutes. He has a first-class ticket booked under a dummy corporation name, but he cannot board without moving the rest of the digital assets. The cash in the duffel bag is just for walking around. He needs to transfer the remaining $4 million in offshore funds from his domestic shell company to his international account before he leaves United States soil, or the feds will freeze it during the routine Monday morning sweep." Vanessa watched my laptop screen, her eyes darting across the scrolling lines of code she could not comprehend. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "If you freeze the shell company accounts right now, he will know we are on to him. He will run." "I am not freezing anything," I replied, my fingers gliding effortlessly across the keyboard. "When you corner a rat, you do not just block its hole. You open a second door that leads directly into an incinerator." Bradley thinks he is a financial genius. He thinks he can outsmart the system because he has always been protected by his privilege and his arrogance. I am going to let him think he is winning. I bypassed the standard security protocols on the brokerage servers that Bradley had used for his laundering operations. For the past 48 hours, my team had completely locked down every financial gateway out of his accounts. Now I was purposefully unblocking a single specific routing channel. It was an obscure offshore gateway that looked completely unprotected to anyone rushing to move dirty money. But it was not, it was a digital bear trap. This specific routing channel was directly monitored by the Homeland Security Anti-Money Laundering Division. Any transaction over $10,000 moving through this specific gateway automatically triggered a priority. One federal alert overriding all local jurisdictions and summoning immediate federal intervention. The gateway is open. Marcus, I confirmed, watching the green indicator light pulse on my screen. He has a clear path to wire the remaining stolen millions out of the church's phantom equity account. Marcus let out a low, appreciative laugh on the other end of the line. You are handing him a loaded gun, Rachel. I am giving him enough rope to hang himself. I corrected, leaning back against the counter. Bradley is sitting in traffic right now, sweating through his custom suit, terrified that his empire is gone. As soon as he clears airport security, he is going to head straight for the VIP lounge. He is going to open his laptop, connect to the secure Wi-Fi, and try to save his stolen fortune. When he sees that one single gateway is miraculously open, his arrogance will override his caution. He will think he found a loophole. He will think he beat the system. Vanessa stared at me, a mixture of awe and absolute terror on her face. You planned this. You planned exactly how he would run. I do not plan for failure, Vanessa, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the pulsing green light on my monitor. I plan for human nature. Bradley's nature is greed. He will not be able to leave the country without trying to take the church's last remaining millions. And the exact second he hits that transfer button, he will bypass state-level fraud and commit an undeniable federal crime on an international network. Marcus, what is his current location? I asked. He just pulled into the international terminal drop-off. Marcus reported, his voice tight with anticipation. He is abandoning his vehicle at the curb. He is moving fast, Rachel. He has the duffel bag over his shoulder. He is bypassing the main ticketing counter and heading straight for the premium security checkpoint. I pulled up a secondary window on my laptop. Using the high-level corporate security clearance I possessed through my private equity firm, I accessed the secure camera feeds for the international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing into a crisp, high-definition view of the premium security lane. There he is, I whispered, pointing at the screen. Vanessa leaned in close, her breath hitching as she watched her husband. The man who had just discarded her like trash, shoving his way past a family of tourists to reach the front of the security line. He looked frantic. His tie was loosened, his face was flushed, and he was clutching his laptop bag to his chest like a lifeline. He cleared the metal detectors, snatching his bags off the conveyor belt, without bothering to put his shoes back on properly. He practically sprinted toward the concourse escalators, heading exactly where I knew he would go. The exclusive lounge. He is entering the lounge now, Marcus confirmed, matching my visual feed. The trap is primed, Rachel. We are just waiting on him to log in. I poured myself another half glass of Cabernet, keeping my eyes glued to the digital routing monitor on my screen. The green light continued to pulse, a silent invitation to a greedy, desperate man. Come on, Bradley, I murmured, taking a slow, calculated sip of my wine. Take the bait. Show the world exactly who you are. The high-definition security feed showed Bradley pacing inside the exclusive airport lounge. I was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He threw his heavy canvas duffel bag onto a plush leather chair in the corner, inadvertently exposing a thick stack of $100 bills zipped near the top edge. He quickly shoved the cash back inside, glancing around with the paranoid intensity of a hunted animal. Other elite travelers, sipping their pre-flight mimosas, cast irritated looks his way. But Bradley was completely blind to their judgment. He pulled his sleek silver laptop from his briefcase, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it onto the glass coffee table. He is logging into the offshore portal, Marcus announced, his voice coming through the speakerphone crisp and analytical. The primary firewalls are blocking his standard credentials just as we programmed. He is trying his secondary backup accounts now. Access denied across the board. I swirled the dark red wine in my glass, keeping my eyes locked on the live feed. He is panicking, I said, my voice low and steady. Watch his body language, Vanessa. Look at the man you thought was going to elevate your social standing. Vanessa stood paralyzed beside my kitchen island, staring at my laptop screen. Her breath hitched as she watched her husband aggressively slam his fist against his keyboard. He ripped off his expensive silk tie, throwing it onto the floor. This was the man who had mocked my career, who had constantly dropped microaggressions about my hair and my clothes at family dinners, implying I lacked the refinement necessary for his elite corporate world. Now he looked like a common thief scrambling to secure his stolen loot before the authorities arrived. Hi is trying the Cayman routing numbers. Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and realization. He told me those accounts were set up for our future children. He said it was a generational wealth trust to protect our family from domestic tax liabilities. He lied to you to get your signature on the authorization forms. I corrected her mercilessly. You were the managing broker of the firm, Vanessa. If those accounts were audited by the state, you were the one going to prison while he claimed ignorance. He weaponized your desire for a perfect wealthy family to shield himself from federal scrutiny. On the screen, Bradley frantically typed in a new set of digits. The green light on my routing monitor flared bright yellow, indicating a massive data request was pushing against the single gateway I had deliberately left open. He found the trap, Marcus confirmed, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the phone line. He is attempting to force a transfer of $4.2 million. He is bundling the remaining church equity with the drained assets from your parents' personal retirement funds. He is trying to take it all in one single transaction. Let him load it, I commanded, setting my wineglass down on the marble counter. Do not interrupt the handshake protocol. Let him verify the destination account. The tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vanessa gripped the edge of the counter, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the stone. He is actually going to do it, she sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of her absolute humiliation. He is taking my parents' entire retirement savings. He is leaving them with absolutely nothing. He promised my father he would protect the church. He swore on a Bible in front of the entire congregation. Your father wanted to be deceived, Vanessa, I stated flatly, refusing to offer her any false comfort. Thomas wanted the prestige of a white corporate developer son-in-law so badly he was willing to blind himself to the blatant financial irregularities. He handed Bradley the keys to the kingdom because Bradley promised him an elevated status in a world that never respected either of them. They fed each other's toxic egos, and this is the harvest. On the monitor, a loading bar appeared on my interface screen. Bradley had initiated the transfer. The progress bar crept forward. 10%, 20%. I could see him on the security feed leaning dangerously close to his laptop screen, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He let out a visible sigh of relief, leaning back in the plush leather chair, thinking he had successfully outsmarted the system. He thought his white-collar privilege had provided him with a magical escape hatch. He thought he was untouchable. The transfer is at 90%, Marcus warned, his voice tightening. Rachel, if he completes this routing, we will have to fight international banking courts for years to repatriate those funds. We need to shut the gateway down right now. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes fixed on the digital progress bar. Hold the line, Marcus, I ordered smoothly. Let him cross the federal threshold. 95%, Marcus counted down. 98%, Rachel. Execute the trap, I commanded. The loading bar on my screen instantly flashed a brilliant violet red. The word declined stamped itself across the digital interface in massive bold letters. But the rejection did not just stop the transfer. By attempting to move an illegally obtained sum of over $4 million through a flagged Homeland Security checkpoint, Bradley had automatically triggered a Priority 1 anti-money laundering protocol. On the security feed, I watched Bradley's expression transform from smug relief to absolute devastation. He frantically tapped his touchpad, trying to refresh the screen, but his laptop was completely frozen, locked by the federal enforcement algorithm. He grabbed the screen, trying to physically shake the machine into working. It is done, Marcus announced, letting out a long breath. The federal alert just hit the national database. The airport security network has been notified. They are locking down the international terminal. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that held 14 years of suppressed rage. Watch the door, Vanessa, I instructed, pointing at the live feed. Watch what happens to the man who thought he could steal from our community and fly away to paradise. We did not have to wait long. Less than 30 seconds after the transfer failed, the heavy glass doors of the exclusive airport lounge burst open. 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical vests, stamped with FBI and Homeland Security acronyms, swarmed into the room. The elite travelers scattered, screaming and pulling their luggage out of the way as the agents moved with terrifying speed and precision. Bradley jumped up from his chair, knocking over the glass coffee table. He reached for his duffel bag full of the church's stolen cash, but he was far too slow. An agent tackled him from behind, slamming him face first into the carpeted floor. The heavy canvas bag ripped open, sending thousands of dollars in cash fluttering into the air like worthless green confetti. Bradley screamed, demanding his lawyer, invoking his rights, throwing out corporate buzzwords, but his arrogant voice was completely muffled as they wrenched his arms behind his back and secured the heavy steel handcuffs. They dragged him to his feet. His custom suit was ruined. His face was scraped and terrified. As the federal agents marched him roughly through the crowded terminal, I reached over and closed my laptop, shutting off the feed. I turned back to Vanessa, whose eyes were wide and vacant, staring at the blank screen. "He is not going to the Cayman Islands," I said softly, picking up my wine glass. "He is going to federal prison. Now dry your tears, Vanessa. We have a charity gala to attend tonight, and I need you to be completely present when I dismantle our parents' false empire in front of the entire city." The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Biltmore Hotel was dripping in imported white orchids and the suffocating scent of desperate money. This was the crown jewel of my parents' social calendar, the Grace and Truth Annual Empowerment Gala. Tonight was supposed to be their victory lap. Instead, it was their last frantic attempt to bail water from a sinking ship. I stepped out of the Maybach wearing a floor-length emerald green gown that left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. I was not here to blend in. I was here to conquer. I reached back into the car and grabbed Vanessa's wrist, pulling her out onto the red carpet. She stumbled slightly, her face pale and devoid of her usual arrogant glow. I had forced my makeup artist to fix her ruined face, but no amount of expensive foundation could hide the absolute terror in her eyes. She knew her husband was currently sitting in a federal holding cell. She knew her parents were about to face public ruin, and she knew I was holding the leash. "Smile, Vanessa," I commanded, linking my arm through hers in a vice grip that looked like sisterly affection to the flashing cameras. "If you want to avoid an accessory charge tomorrow, you will walk into this ballroom and act like the proud, supportive daughter." We glided past the velvet ropes and entered the massive ballroom. The room was packed with the black elite of Atlanta. Mayors, city council members, wealthy business owners, and prominent judges mingled around towering ice sculptures. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos floated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne. On the far side of the room, I spotted my parents. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Thomas was gripping the hands of a prominent local politician, laughing loudly with his head thrown back. But his eyes were frantic, darting constantly toward the entrance. Patricia was clutching a crystal flute of sparkling water, touching the arms of wealthy donors, and smiling so hard the tendons in her neck looked like they might snap. They were hunting for cash. They needed millions of dollars by Monday morning to replace the outreach funds Bradley had stolen, and they were trying to squeeze it out of this ballroom, one tax-deductible donation at a time. Thomas spotted us first. The relief that washed over his face was pathetic. He immediately abandoned the politician and rushed toward us, grabbing Vanessa's shoulders. "Where is Bradley?" he hissed, his voice low and urgent, pulling us into a quiet alcove near the silent auction tables. "Did he secure the bridge loan?" "Tell me he secured the capital, Vanessa, because the bank examiners left 3 voicemails on my private line this afternoon." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at me, her chest heaving with silent panic. "Bradley ran into a slight delay at the airport, Dad," I said, stepping smoothly between them. "He is currently dealing with some high-level federal compliance officers." He sent us ahead so we would not miss Mother giving her keynote address. Thomas let out a heavy breath, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. Federal compliance officers, he muttered, shaking his head. Always some bureaucratic red tape. But he has the funds secured right. He is wiring the money. Oh, the funds are completely secured. I smiled, adjusting my emerald gown. Nobody is moving a single dime without my direct authorization. Thomas let out a massive sigh of relief, completely missing the lethal double meaning of my words. He patted my shoulder, a gesture of patriarchal approval he had withheld for 14 years. Thank the Lord, he breathed. I knew Bradley would pull through. I knew we were protected. You see, Rachel, this is how real families operate. We cover each other in times of trial. Before I could remind him that his version of covering family involved committing massive financial fraud, Patricia glided over to our alcove. She grabbed Thomas' arm, her diamond rings sparkling under the chandeliers. Thomas, it is time, she whispered, her eyes scanning the room nervously. The auction bids are stalling. We need to do the paddle raise now or we will never hit the target. She turned to me, offering a tight, artificial smile. Rachel, find your seat at the VIP table. Try not to look so severe. We need the donors to feel inspired tonight. I watched my parents walk toward the grand stage, holding hands like a united front of moral superiority. I guided Vanessa to our designated table right in the front row. Marcus was already seated there, looking sharp in a black tuxedo. He gave me a brief nod, indicating that the final pieces of our financial trap were fully locked and loaded. The lights in the massive ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the center of the stage as Patricia stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent out of respect for the First Lady of Grace and Truth. Friends, family, community leaders. Patricia began, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the power of faith and the strength of our community. But I must be honest with you all. This has been a season of intense spiritual warfare for our family and our ministry. She paused, pulling a lace handkerchief from her clutch and dabbing delicately at her dry eyes. The crowd murmured in sympathetic agreement. We have faced trials that would break ordinary people. She continued, her voice rising in a masterful cadence of victimhood. But we stand before you unbroken, because of our commitment to the less fortunate. Our community outreach fund has been stretched to its absolute limits this year. We have given everything we have to build a brighter future for the youth of this city. But the devil is always trying to halt progress. I took a slow sip of my water, marveling at her sheer audacity. She was actually blaming the devil for the fact that she wired youth scholarship money to a luxury car dealership in Miami. Tonight we are asking you to stand in the gap with us, Patricia pleaded, gripping the edges of the podium. We need to raise $5 million to secure the land for our new empowerment center. We need your generous tax-deductible seed money right now to ensure the next generation of Black leaders has a place to thrive. Please open your hearts and your checkbooks. The crowd erupted into applause. Wealthy donors began reaching for their bidding paddles, moved by her flawless performance. Thomas stepped up to the microphone, ready to read off the first massive donation and start the bidding war. Marcus leaned over to me, his voice barely a whisper over the booming applause. The media contacts are in position, Rachel. The local news anchors are waiting for your signal. I looked at my mother, standing on the stage, basking in the adoration of the elite crowd she had spent her life trying to impress. I looked at my father, preparing to steal millions more to cover his tracks. Then I stood up from my front row seat, smoothing the emerald silk of my gown. Signal them, I commanded, stepping into the center aisle. It is time to pass the collection plate. Marcus tapped his earpiece twice, a subtle gesture that set a multi-million-dollar demolition in motion. Up on the grand stage, Thomas gripped the polished mahogany podium. The ballroom was completely silent, waiting for him to announce the first starting bid for the youth center land acquisition. But before he could open his mouth to solicit the first fraudulent donation, the master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped forward, adjusting his earpiece with a look of absolute astonishment. Ladies and gentlemen, the anchor announced, his professionally modulated voice trembling slightly, we have just received an unprecedented update from the Church Financial Board. Before we even begin tonight paddle raise, I have been informed that the entire $5 million goal has already been met. In fact, a single anonymous donor has stepped forward this evening to purchase the church's entire commercial debt portfolio, effectively saving the Grace and Truth Fellowship from all outstanding financial liabilities. The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Wealthy politicians and elite socialites rose to their feet, cheering the miraculous display of philanthropic wealth. On stage, Patricia gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth as tears of absolute relief streamed down her perfectly contoured face. Thomas raised his hands toward the vaulted ceiling, closing his eyes and shouting praises to the heavens. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought some billionaire parishioner had blindly written a check to cover their tracks and save their gilded empire. "We must thank this angel investor," Thomas boomed into the microphone, his voice thick with performative emotion. "Whoever you are, wherever you are sitting in this glorious room tonight, please stand up and let this community bless you. We want to honor the family that saved our legacy." The lighting technician, who had been briefed by Marcus earlier in the evening, killed the ambient chandeliers. A single blinding white spotlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the crowded ballroom. It bypassed the mayor's table. It moved past the corporate sponsors. It swept over the silent auction displays and locked directly onto the center aisle. The beam of light illuminated the emerald green silk of my gown. The applause began to falter, rippling into a confused murmur as people turned their heads to look at me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the aisle, completely bathed in the stark white light. I did not wave. I did not smile the humble, gracious smile of a charitable donor. I stared straight ahead, fixing my gaze directly on my parents standing on the elevated stage. Thomas lowered his hands. His booming pastoral smile froze into a grotesque mask of confusion. Patricia lowered her lace handkerchief, her eyes widening in absolute terror as she recognized the deep emerald fabric she had just criticized me for wearing minutes earlier. Rachel Thomas breathed, his voice echoing softly through the sensitive podium microphone. You are the anonymous donor. You paid the debt." I began to walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted instinctively, stepping back to give me a wide berth. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, a steady, relentless countdown to their destruction. Marcus walked 3 paces behind me, carrying the sleek silver briefcase that held their financial death warrants. When I reached the velvet-covered stairs leading up to the stage, 2 church deacons stepped forward to help me up, assuming I was coming to embrace my parents. I ignored their outstretched hands and glided up the steps, my emerald gown trailing behind me like a shadow. I walked directly up to Thomas. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically between me and the thousands of prominent guests watching our every move. He tried to quickly recover his composure, forcing a wide artificial smile as he reached out to pull me into a patriarchal embrace. "Praise the Lord," Thomas announced to the crowd, trying to spin the narrative in real time. "The Lord works through our own blood. My brilliant daughter Rachel, a managing director in New York, has returned home to bless her childhood congregation. Let us give her a hand." I did not step into his embrace. I stopped inches from the podium and looked at him with an expression so cold it made him physically recoil. I reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling hand. "I did not return home to bless you, Dad," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that echoed into every corner of the massive ballroom. "I returned home to audit you." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. The mayor leaned forward in his seat. The local news anchor standing near the edge of the stage signaled to his camera crew in the back of the room to start recording. Patricia rushed forward, grabbing my arm with her sharp, manicured fingers. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed under her breath, desperate to keep her voice out of the microphone range. "You are humiliating us in front of the entire city. Give him the microphone and go sit down before you ruin the family name forever." I jerked my arm out of her grip with such force she stumbled backward into a massive floral arrangement. I turned to the audience, keeping the microphone perfectly steady. "My parents just told you a very moving story about spiritual warfare and financial trials," I said, projecting my voice clearly to the back of the room. "They asked you to open your checkbooks to save the Community Outreach Fund. They told you they needed $5 million to buy land for the youth of Atlanta. What they conveniently forgot to mention was why the Outreach Fund is currently completely empty." Thomas lunged forward, trying to snatch the microphone back. "Rachel, stop this right now," he ordered, his voice a panicked growl. "Turn off her microphone," he yelled at the sound booth in the back. "Cut the audio right now." But the audio did not cut. Marcus had already intercepted the sound engineer, handing him a manila folder containing the upcoming federal indictments and politely advising him to keep his hands off the mixing board if he wanted to avoid an obstruction of justice charge. "They did not lose your donations to a spiritual trial," I continued, my voice rising in power and absolute conviction. "They did not lose your tithes to a bad economy. Your pastor and his wife intentionally wired over $30 million of your hard-earned money to a series of fraudulent offshore shell companies, and they did it to fund the lavish lifestyle of my sister Vanessa and her white commercial developer husband Bradley." The ballroom exploded into pure chaos. People jumped out of their seats, shouting in disbelief. The deacons rushed the stage, looking bewildered and angry. Patricia screamed, covering her face as the news cameras zoomed in on her ruined composure. "You are lying!" Thomas roared, his pastoral facade completely destroyed, leaving only a desperate cornered thief trying to cling to his crumbling empire. "She is a bitter, estranged child, making up sick lies to hurt this ministry because she turned her back on God. Bradley is a legitimate businessman. He is securing bridge loans for the church right now. He is going to double our endowment. He is a good man saving this family." I turned to look at my father, letting a cold, predatory smile touch my lips. The trap was fully sprung, and it was time to let the floor drop out from underneath him entirely. "Bradley is not securing a bridge loan, Dad," I said softly, raising the microphone so everyone could hear his final burial. "Bradley is currently sitting in federal custody at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. He was arrested exactly 42 minutes ago, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a duffel bag full of the emergency cash reserves he stole from your personal wall safe today." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, ringing sound of an entire generational empire turning to dust. For 10 seconds, no one in the massive ballroom dared to breathe. The elite guests stared in paralyzed shock. Then murmurs began escalating into a deafening roar of outrage. Thomas gripped the mahogany podium, his knuckles white. He leaned into the microphone, his voice cracking. "This is a fabrication," Thomas shouted. "My daughter is unwell. She has been estranged for 14 years and is suffering from a mental breakdown. Bradley is a pillar of this community." I simply raised my hand, giving Marcus a nod. Standing by the sound booth, Marcus tapped his tablet. The massive digital screens flanking the stage went black, then illuminated, displaying the undeniable truth. Banking ledgers filled the screens, bearing the Church Outreach Fund seal. Wire transfers showed exact dollar amounts moving directly into Bradley's offshore shell companies. Marcus then projected Vanessa's credit card statements. The ballroom gasped, reading the itemized purchases. $50,000 at a luxury car dealership. $30,000 for a private yacht. All paid using routing numbers connected to the Single Mothers Ministry and Youth Scholarship Fund. "Turn it off!" Patricia shrieked, lunging toward the projection screen. "Someone cut the power right now. This is a targeted smear campaign. We are under spiritual attack." Nobody moved. The sound engineer stepped away from his board. Wealthy donors shoved their chairs back, standing in disgust. The mayor signaled his security to escort him out, refusing to let his political career be tainted by this religious fraud scandal. "You are not under spiritual attack, Mother," I said into the microphone. "You are under federal indictment. You built a kingdom on hardworking Black people who trusted you. Instead, you sheared the flock, keeping your golden child draped in diamonds." Deacon Hayes, head of the church board, marched down the center aisle. Bypassing security, he stepped onto the stage. Ignoring me, he walked straight up to Thomas and pulled the microphone cord right out of the podium. "Thomas, you are finished," Deacon Hayes said, his voice shaking with grief and rage. "The board is seizing administrative access immediately. We are calling the authorities to report the embezzlement, and you will not leave until police arrive." Thomas stumbled backward, hitting the velvet curtains. He turned his frantic eyes toward me. "Rachel, please," he begged, abandoning his pastoral authority. "You bought the debt. You are the sole owner of the financial portfolio. You can restructure this and tell the board we reached a private settlement. You have the power to keep us out of prison. You are my flesh and blood." "Flesh and blood," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "That is a convenient concept to weaponize tonight, Dad." But let us talk about flesh and blood. Let us talk about the summer I turned 16. The ballroom suddenly quieted down, sensing another devastating revelation. Patricia froze her eyes, widening in absolute terror, realizing exactly which memory I was about to drag into the light. "Do you remember the missing youth ministry funds?" I asked. $10,000 vanished from the church safe. You knew Vanessa stole that cash for a luxury spring break trip. But you could not let the congregation know your perfect golden child was a thief. What did you tell the board, Mother? Patricia clamped her hands over her ears, shaking her head. "Stop it," she sobbed, her pristine image demolished. "Leave the past in the past, Rachel. We did what we had to do to protect the family image. You protected Vanessa by telling the board I stole the money I announced to the horrified crowd. You forced me to pack a single bag and threw me onto the street telling everyone I was a troubled runaway. You sacrificed your 16-year-old daughter to the streets of Atlanta just to maintain the illusion of your perfect elite family. You let me starve so Vanessa could shine." The sheer cruelty of the revelation hung heavily in the air. Deacon Hayes looked at Patricia with absolute revulsion, stepping away from her as if she carried a plague. "I did not buy this debt to save you, Dad," I said, returning focus to Thomas. "I bought this debt to permanently foreclose on your hypocrisy. I own the administrative wing. I own the television studio. I own the very ground you are standing on. Tomorrow morning, I am signing all of it over to an independent community trust. A trust that explicitly bars you, Patricia, Vanessa, and Bradley, from ever stepping foot on this property again." Thomas dropped to his knees on the polished stage. The powerful, charismatic leader who had ruled the city's elite circles for decades was reduced to a weeping, trembling mess. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my emerald gown. "You cannot do this to us," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "We will have nothing. We will be ruined. We have no savings left. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked down at the man who had discarded me without a second thought. I gently but firmly pulled the silk fabric of my gown out of his desperate grasp. "You can go exactly where you sent me when I was 16, I replied, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any pity. "Out into the real world." I turned my back on my parents and walked toward the edge of the stage where Marcus was waiting. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as I descended the stairs. The sound of distant police sirens began to wail outside the hotel, drawing closer by the second. The authorities were finally arriving to collect the broken pieces of Thomas and Patricia's fraudulent empire. Marcus handed me my coat. "Are we finished here, Rachel?" he asked, his professional demeanor unbroken by the chaos. "We are finished with the past, Marcus," I said, slipping my arms into the coat. "But we have a very important and massive real estate transaction to announce tomorrow. Let us secure the future." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The microphone amplified the cold, hard truth into every corner of the Biltmore ballroom. "Look at the screens," I instructed the crowd. "Marcus, execute the financial sequence." The monitors instantly shifted to something more damning. The Grace and Truth Fellowship Community Outreach Ledger appeared. Beside it, Marcus projected corresponding receiving accounts. I walked across the stage, allowing the undeniable evidence to sink into the minds of the city's elite. "On the left, you see the monthly tithes," I explained. "You see checks from retired teachers. You see $5 donations from single mothers supporting the youth academy. You see the sacrifice of a working-class Black community. And on the right, you see exactly where that sacrifice went." The screen flashed, highlighting a $2 million transfer. "This was billed as seed money for the housing initiative," I continued. "Watch where it travels." An animated red line traced the funds directly into Zenith Properties. The audience watched as the trail exposed my parents' empire. "Zenith Properties is a shell company registered to my brother-in-law Bradley," I stated. "A man who was just arrested by federal agents for wire fraud. He used your tithes to pay off his underwater loans because no bank would lend him a dime." The collective gasp was deafening. The sheer audacity of the theft paralyzed the room for a second before outrage began to boil over. But I was not finished. I had to destroy the golden child's facade. "Marcus, the expenses," I commanded. The screens shifted again. Bradley's ledgers were placed beside Vanessa's credit card statements. "My mother just stood here and told you about spiritual warfare," I said. "She begged you for $5 million to fight the devil." But the devil did not buy a vacation home in Miami. Vanessa did. I pointed at the screen. $50,000 transferred from the scholarship fund, so Vanessa could drive a Range Rover. $30,000 pulled from the senior citizen fund and wired to a boutique so Vanessa could maintain her high society status. She wore your grocery money on her back. She funded cosmetic surgeries with money donated to build a community center. The resulting noise from the crowd was a visceral roar of betrayal. Wealthy political donors stood up, knocking their chairs backward. A prominent city councilwoman shouted for her assistant to cancel her check immediately. The facade of black elite perfection that my parents had ruthlessly guarded was being ripped apart transaction by transaction. Thomas finally snapped out of his shock. The realization that his reign as the untouchable patriarch of Atlanta was over pushed him into a frantic panic. He lunged forward, his face contorted in absolute rage. He abandoned every ounce of pastoral dignity, charging across the stage to rip the microphone from my hands. "Shut your mouth!" he roared, his heavy footsteps thundering across the floorboards. "Shut your lying mouth right now. You are possessed by a spirit of jealousy. Turn off those screens. Security, remove this woman from my stage." He reached out his hands, clawing for the microphone stand. I did not flinch. I stood my ground because I knew I was no longer alone in this fight. Before Thomas' fingers could brush the metal stand, 3 men in tailored suits intercepted him. It was Deacon Hayes, flanked by 2 senior elders. They had marched up the side stairs, their faces hardened into terrifying masks of absolute unyielding disgust. Deacon Hayes, a former offensive lineman, grabbed Thomas by both shoulders and shoved him backward with staggering force. Thomas stumbled, his expensive custom suit jacket bunching up as he hit the polished floor of the stage. "Do not you dare touch her, Thomas Deacon!" Hayes thundered, his voice vibrating with a righteous anger that Thomas had only ever faked. "You have disgraced this sanctuary and this community. Get your hands off me right now!" Thomas spat desperately, trying to scramble back to his feet in front of the entire congregation. "I am the pastor of this church. I am the shepherd of this flock. You all answer directly to me." "You are a thief," the second elder stated, stepping forward to form a physical wall. "You looked us in the eye during board meetings and swore those funds were locked in high-yield bonds. You let us pray for your vision while you were robbing our people blind to fund a white con artist. You do not have a flock anymore, Thomas. You have a crime scene." Patricia crawled across the stage, grabbing the hem of Deacon Hayes' trousers. "Please, William," she begged in a desperate plea for mercy. "We can sell the cars and the house. We can pay it all back. Do not let her destroy our legacy." "Your legacy is already dead," Patricia, Deacon Hayes said, pulling his leg away from her grasp. "Police are waiting in the lobby. The board voted unanimously. We are pressing full criminal charges right now." I looked down at the 2 people who had thrown me away when I was 16 years old because I refused to conform to their hypocritical image. They were broken, weeping on the floor of the very stage they had used to manipulate thousands. They traded their daughter for a golden facade and now had nothing left. I stepped around my father's trembling form and walked back to the center of the stage. The furious crowd was still shouting loudly, but as I slowly raised the microphone back to my lips, a deep, heavy hush fell over the entire ballroom. They were waiting anxiously for the final blow. "I told you I bought your debt," I said, addressing the broken man on the floor, before turning my gaze back to the captivated audience. "But I did not just buy the church's debt. I also bought the asset that started this entire cascade of fraud." "Marcus, bring up the final deed." I paused at the edge of the ballroom floor. The wailing of police sirens outside was growing deafening. I looked at Marcus and he immediately handed the microphone back to me. I slipped my coat off. "I am not quite finished," I told him, my voice steady. "The evening news cameras are still rolling, and I want this on the public record before the police put handcuffs on my father." I walked back toward the center of the room. The sea of wealthy donors and church members parted for me. On the stage, Thomas and Patricia were sobbing on the polished hardwood floor, their pristine reputation shattered. Deacon Hayes stepped aside respectfully as I raised the microphone to my lips one final time. "Before the authorities enter this room to arrest my parents, I want to address the $50 million commercial project that Bradley used to drain your bank accounts," I announced. My voice echoed through the massive chandeliers. The prime downtown real estate that my brother-in-law intended to bulldoze for luxury condos. I acquired it at 8 o'clock this morning. The ballroom erupted in a collective gasp. The local news anchors signaled their cameramen to zoom in on my face. Patricia lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes wide with a sudden desperate greed that not even the threat of federal prison could suppress. "I'll bought the commercial zone," Patricia choked out, her voice raspy. "Rachel, you can transfer the equity to us. We can still build the towers. We can sell the penthouse suites to foreign investors just like Bradley planned. We can make a fortune and pay the church back. You have the power to keep the family wealth intact. You have the power to keep the family wealth intact." I looked down at the woman who birthed me, feeling nothing but absolute disgust. She was facing felony charges, and her only thought was salvaging her imaginary high society status. "There will be no luxury towers, Mother," I replied, shutting down her delusion. I did not buy that city block to continue Bradley's legacy of gentrification. He wanted to tear down historic black neighborhoods to build glass monuments for the ultra-wealthy. He called it urban renewal, but it was cultural erasure. It was cultural erasure. And you and Dad supported his hostile takeovers because he promised you a custom-built penthouse suite with a private elevator. You sold out your own people for a skyline view. You sold out your own people. I turned my attention back to the captivated audience, scanning the faces of the community leaders and working-class parishioners. "It will not be high-rises for the wealthy," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "The deed has been placed into an irrevocable trust, heavily guarded by my legal team. It cannot be sold, divided, or leveraged by any bank. Instead, that land is going to be used to build a tuition-free tech and business incubator for young Black entrepreneurs in Atlanta. It will be a fully funded campus where the youth of this city can learn coding, financial literacy, and corporate management without taking on a single dime of predatory debt." Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into a deafening standing ovation. People were cheering, crying, and clapping. The raw emotional release of a community that had just watched their stolen future be handed right back to them was overwhelming. I raised my hand, calling for quiet so I could deliver the final piece of the puzzle. "And this new campus will not bear the name of Grace and Truth Fellowship," I continued, locking eyes with my father. "And it certainly will not bear the name of Bradley or Vanessa. It is named after our grandparents, the ones who actually scrubbed floors to build this family legacy before greed corrupted it." Thomas flinched as if I had struck him across the face. "My grandfather worked 2 back-breaking shifts at the rail yard for 30 years, I reminded the crowd. My grandmother cleaned houses in Buckhead, scrubbing the toilets of the white elite so she could save enough money to send you to seminary school, Dad. They wore holes in their shoes so you could stand behind a pulpit in a tailored suit and preach the gospel. They built the foundation of this family with honest blood and sweat. And you repaid their sacrifice by robbing the very community they prayed for. You traded their honorable legacy for country club memberships and imported cars." Patricia let out a loud, hysterical wail. "You are giving away our inheritance, Rachel," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are giving away our generational wealth to strangers. You are leaving your own sister with nothing." Vanessa, who had been standing paralyzed, suddenly pushed her way to the front. Her designer dress was wrinkled and her makeup was smeared. "Rachel, please," Vanessa begged, her voice shaking with raw terror. "Bradley is going to prison. My accounts are frozen. I have absolutely nothing left. I have absolutely nothing left. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" I looked at my older sister, the golden child who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to reach the top. I did not feel an ounce of pity. "You have your vanity, Vanessa," I replied coldly. "Let us see how much that pays on the open market. And as for your inheritance, Mother, it was never your inheritance. It was stolen money, and I am simply returning it to the people you stole it from." Before Patricia could scream another word, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. A dozen uniformed Atlanta police officers marched into the room, flanked by plainclothes detectives. The flashing red and blue lights from their squad cars outside illuminated the grand foyer, casting an eerie glow over the gala. The crowd parted instantly, giving the officers a clear path to the stage. The lead detective walked straight up the velvet steps, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Thomas and Patricia Sterling, the detective, announced, his voice cutting through the remaining noise. You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Thomas simply hung his head, holding his wrists out, as the cold metal clicked into place. The great pastor of Atlanta was reduced to a common criminal. Patricia, however, fought wildly. She thrashed against the female officers, sobbing about her reputation and demanding to call the mayor. The mayor purposefully turned his back, walking out the side door and pretending he had never met her. I watched them drag my parents down the center aisle. The cameras flashed blindingly, capturing every second of their public ruin. I handed the microphone back to Deacon Hayes. The church belongs to the community again, I told him quietly. I turned and walked toward the exit, Marcus falling into step beside me. The cool night air hit my face as we stepped out of the Biltmore Hotel. The sirens were deafening, but my mind was completely silent. The empire of lies was entirely dismantled, and for the first time in 14 years I was finally free. I was finally free. The morning after the gala, the entire city of Atlanta woke up to a seismic shift. The federal courthouse downtown was swarmed by local media, but the man they were waiting to see did not walk out the front doors. Bradley stood before a federal judge wearing a neon orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his fading spray tan. His high-priced defense attorney argued for house arrest, citing his ties to the community and his supposedly legitimate business ventures. The judge, a no-nonsense black woman, who had reviewed the extensive financial dossiers Marcus provided, did not even blink. She read the wire fraud charges, the grand larceny counts, and the attempted international flight risk into the public record. Bail was denied instantly. The man who had spent 3 years mocking my career and dropping microaggressions over expensive Wagyu dinners was remanded to federal custody. He was stripped of his tailored suit and handed a rough cotton uniform. He is currently facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a maximum security penitentiary without any possibility of early parole. There are no golf courses or vintage champagne bottles where he is going. There is only cold concrete metal bars and the devastating realization that his white-collar privilege could not save him from the absolute precision of my corporate audit. He will spend the next decade remembering the exact moment he realized I was the one holding the keys to his cage. Vanessa did not even bother to show up to his formal federal arraignment. She could not afford the parking fee downtown. The IRS descended on her life with the speed and brutality of a starving predator. Because her signature was on the fraudulent brokerage documents, she was held jointly liable for the stolen church funds and the unpaid taxes on her luxury purchases. Federal agents seized the Miami vacation condo, the imported vehicles, and every piece of designer jewelry she flaunted on social media. Her bank accounts remained permanently frozen, stripped of her golden child status and her stolen wealth. She was forced to move into a tiny 300-square-foot studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. The woman who sneered at my New York apartment now sleeps on a cheap mattress touching her kitchen counter. Yesterday, Marcus sent me a photograph taken by one of our private investigators. It showed Vanessa wearing cheap medical scrubs, sitting behind the reception desk of a mid-tier strip mall dental clinic. She was scheduling teeth cleanings for the exact same working-class citizens she used to despise. The irony is poetic. She answers the phone all day, and when she looks up, she sees a framed poster on the clinic wall advertising the new tuition-free tech incubator I am building downtown. She cannot escape the reality of her own failure. Every time a patient complains about a billing issue, she is forced to swallow her legendary pride and apologize. She has no safety net left to catch her, and no wealthy husband to finance her illusions of grandeur. The diamond bracelets and designer handbags have been replaced by a plastic name tag and a strict clock and schedule. My parents' fall from grace was the most spectacular public dismantling Atlanta had seen in a decade. The morning after their arrest, the Board of Elders at Grace and Truth Fellowship held an emergency public meeting. Deacon Hayes stood at this pulpit. Thomas had disgraced and formally announced the immediate and permanent excommunication of the former pastor and his wife. The church congregation voted unanimously to strip Thomas of his pension and revoke the deed to the sprawling pastoral mansion they had occupied for 20 years. Patricia desperately called every politician, Every charity board member and every wealthy socialite she had aggressively courted over the years. Every single call went straight to voicemail. The elite circles of Atlanta closed their ranks and severed ties instantly. No one wanted the stench of a $30 million embezzlement scandal attached to their brand, facing mounting legal fees and the crushing weight of their public humiliation. My parents were forced to pack whatever meager belongings the authorities had not seized. They quietly fled the city in the middle of the night. They relocated to a small, decaying rural town in southern Georgia, where nobody knows their names and nobody cares about their former glory. They rent a modest two-bedroom house, completely stripped of the crystal chandeliers and mahogany furniture they once used to measure their self-worth. Thomas preaches to an empty living room, and Patricia has no one left to manipulate. The generational curse of narcissism and financial abuse that choked our family for decades was completely severed. For my entire life, I had been told that family loyalty meant silently enduring disrespect, carrying the burden of their massive egos, and financing their toxic delusions. I was taught standing up for myself was betrayal. But as I sat in my penthouse reviewing the final legal documents, finalizing the transfer of the church property to the new community trust, I felt a profound, undeniable peace. I did not destroy my family. They destroyed themselves with their insatiable greed and hollow obsession with status. I simply held up a mirror and let the reflection do the work. The cycle of emotional manipulation that started before I was even born stopped the moment I decided my peace of mind was more valuable than their conditional approval. The toxic roots that had strangled our family tree were pulled up and burned to ash. I did not just survive their attempts to ruin me. I engineered their downfall using the exact same financial systems they tried to weaponize against me. The slate was completely wiped clean. The debts were paid. The criminals were locked away or banished to obscurity, and the wealth they had systematically stolen from the hard-working community was finally returned to the hands of the people who actually deserved it. 4 weeks later, the humid Atlanta summer had finally broken, giving way to a crisp, clear autumn evening. The tires of my Maybach glided seamlessly over the cobblestone driveway of the exact same steakhouse where this entire cascade of destruction had begun. Marcus sat beside me in the back seat, reviewing a digital portfolio of tech startups. He wore a subtle charcoal suit that mirrored my own tailored silk blazer. When the vehicle stopped, the valet captain rushed forward, opening my door with a level of deference that bordered on reverence. He remembered me. Everyone in the elite circles of this city remembered me now. I stepped into the grand lobby. The air still smelled of expensive cologne, roasted prime rib, and elite ambition. But the atmosphere had completely shifted. I was no longer the outcast daughter of a fraudulent megachurch empire. I was the architect of its dismantling and the supreme power broker of the city's new financial landscape. The general manager, the same distinguished older man who had delivered the news of Bradley's frozen accounts, rushed to greet me. He bypassed a line of wealthy politicians waiting for tables, bowing his head slightly as he addressed me. "Welcome back, Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice laced with absolute respect. "Your private dining room is ready for you and your esteemed guests." I led Marcus and me past the crowded main floor and opened the heavy glass doors of the VIP suite. The last time I sat in this room, the air was choked with vanity lies and the desperate need for external validation. My mother had banished me to the patio, while my sister flaunted stolen diamonds. Today, the room vibrated with a completely different, authentic energy. I walked to the head of the long mahogany table, taking the prime seat that Vanessa had once occupied. But the people sitting around me tonight were not toxic relatives or fraudulent developers. To my right sat Marcus, my steadfast ally and legal shield. To my left sat Vivian, a 60-year-old venture capitalist who had mentored me during my first brutal years on Wall Street. And filling the rest of the luxurious leather seats were 6 brilliant young Black entrepreneurs. They were the first official cohort of the newly established Sterling Founders Incubator. They wore sharp blazers and natural hair, carrying tablets filled with proprietary code algorithms and sustainable business models. They were the future of Atlanta, and they were sitting at my table because I had purchased the very land my brother-in-law tried to steal from under their feet. We ordered the finest items on the menu, but unlike Bradley's loud, ostentatious boasting, the conversation here was grounded in genuine creation and mutual respect. A 24-year-old software engineer named Maya leaned forward passionately explaining how her new logistics platform could revolutionize supply chain distribution for minority-owned farms across Georgia. Her eyes shone with the kind of fierce ambition that my parents had always tried to extinguish in me. I listened intently, offering strategic advice on scaling her operations and securing secondary funding rounds from my private equity contacts. This was what real wealth looked like. It was not built on designer bags or exclusionary country club memberships. It was built on lifting up the people who actually had the talent and the drive to change the world. Marcus leaned over as the waiters quietly cleared our dinner plates. He kept his voice low, ensuring only I could hear the final update on the ruins we left behind. The federal prosecutor called my private line this afternoon, he reported. Bradley's defense team tried to negotiate a plea deal. They offered to surrender all remaining hidden assets in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge rejected it instantly. He is going to trial and he is looking at the maximum penalty. And Vanessa, she was officially evicted from the studio apartment this morning after missing her first rent payment. She is currently staying in a weekly motel near the highway, taking double shifts at the dental clinic just to afford groceries. I did not smile. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy or petty triumph. I simply felt the cool, clean sensation of absolute closure. Let the federal courts handle Bradley, I replied smoothly, taking a sip of my sparkling water. And let Vanessa learn how the rest of the real world survives without stolen charity funds to cushion the fall. Cancel the investigator surveillance, Marcus. They are no longer relevant to my portfolio or my life. We have an incubator to launch and millions of dollars to deploy into legitimate businesses. Marcus nodded, closing his tablet and turning his attention back to the table. The past was officially buried, and the dirt was packed down tight. As the young entrepreneurs debated market penetration strategies, the general manager returned to the glass-walled room. He carried a familiar black leather folio. He did not hand it to Marcus or hesitate near the center of the table. He walked directly to the head of the table and placed it gently next to my coffee cup. There was no tension in the room. No one demanded that I pay as payback for imaginary debts. No one hurled racist microaggressions or insults about my career choices or my lack of a wealthy husband. I did not even bother to open the leather folio to check the total. I knew it was exorbitant. We had ordered vintage champagne, dry-aged Wagyu beef, and the most decadent desserts the kitchen could produce. But a $4,000 dinner was no longer a weapon designed to humiliate me. It was simply the cost of doing business with people I actually respected and believed in. I reached into my understated handbag and pulled out a heavy, sleek black card. I placed it on the silver tray without breaking eye contact with Maya, who was finishing her brilliant pitch. The manager took the tray with a quiet murmur of immense gratitude and slipped out the glass doors. I picked up my cup of black coffee, leaning back in the heavy leather chair. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the glittering Atlanta skyline. It was the same skyline Bradley had tried to conquer with fraud, and my parents had tried to rule with religious hypocrisy. They had both failed because they built their massive towers on sinking sand. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark, bitter roast. It tasted sweeter than any vintage wine I had ever consumed. I looked around the table at the brilliant, vibrant faces of the family I had chosen for myself. The toxic roots were entirely gone, and the new foundation was made of solid granite. I owned this city now, fade to black. The greatest lesson I learned from watching my family's empire crumble is that true wealth is never measured by designer clothes or exclusive country club memberships. Real power comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's toxic narrative. Blood does not automatically make someone family, and walking away from generational abuse is not a betrayal. It is the absolute highest form of self-love. If you have ever had to build your own table because you were excluded from theirs, please share your story in the comments below and subscribe for more.